Hey guys, this is Fiction Life. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Harry was raised by Sinistra and outwitted the Goblet of Fire. Here is short summary. Raised under the watchful eye of Professor Sinistra, Harry enters his fourth year armed with knowledge, strategy, and a hidden edge. When the Goblet of Fire forces him into the tournament, he doesn't just survive. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. This place is, Harry paused for a moment looking around Gimald Place, Sirius' childhood home, shite. Sirius, Wayne, and Dawn all cracked up laughing while Aurora and Cyril looked amused. Remus chuckled, and this is cleaned up. Suddenly the curtains on the wall burst open, revealing a portrait of an older woman with gray hair. Her features were distorted with rage, filth. Half-breeds. Blood traitors. She shouted at them. "Shut up, you old hag," Sirius yelled back and slammed the curtains shut, muffling the shouts. Harry and Wayne looked wide-eyed at the now covered portrait. Who in the nine hells was that? Wayne asked. Sirius frowned. My mother. Harry, Wayne, Dawn and Aurora looked at him with varying degrees of sympathy. This was their first time meeting the woman. Charming, Dawn quipped. Isn't she? Sirius asked sarcastically. Right, well, we finished the bottom floor with the kitchen. It's all redone. Cyril, Dawn, and Remus had been at the house helping to first clean it and then redecorate the home. Dawn helped to give the Sirius tips on how to redecorate the home to his tastes, giving it a much-needed women's touch, to keep it from being a total bachelor's pad. Cyril and Remus were lending a hand with transfiguration and charms to change furniture and fixtures that were salvageable. They also would go out to Diagon Alley to purchase new items. Sirius avoided the alley if he could. Too many people either screamed at his appearance or pelted him with a series of unending questions about the Potters and Azkaban. How do you want us to help? Aurora asked. Sirius had been staying with the Sinistras while they worked on Grimmauld Place. They were a month into the summer break and Susan was abroad with Izzy while Neville was with his uncle. His uncle Algie was responsible for managing the Longbottom greenhouses in Plymouth. As Neville showed his improvement in school, his uncle had started to take more positive role in teaching Neville. Algie also realized he would be much better off in the greenhouses given Neville's talents. Neville's uncle wanted him to get more familiar with the business, so 3 days a week Neville went with him to work. If you could take the boys and start on cleaning the next floor up and sorting things for us to look at. Anything that's junk just vanish. Let's go, boys, Aurora said and waved them to the stairs. Harry and Wayne started up but were stopped by Sirius's voice. Oh, and watch out for Creature, Sirius said offhandedly. Creature? Aurora asked as she stepped up the stairs. He's my insane house elf, Sirius said as the 4 adults left the entryway. Was he kidding? Aurora asked the boys. It would be kinda fittin' with this place, Wayne said as they came up to the first landing. The walls were peeling with dark purple wallpaper, nearly black in color, it was so deep. Aurora waved her wand and the hallway lit up with much more light. I think that makes it worse, Harry said. He went to the first door, which opened up to a drawing room. One wall was completely dominated by an ornate family tree. The branches held portraits of the members of House Black with their names and dates. Whoa, Wayne said going up to look at it. That's a lot of people. Aurora and Harry joined him. The Blacks are one of the oldest wizarding families in Britain, Aurora said, placing a hand on Wayne's shoulder. What are these burn marks? Harry asked, running his hand over the spots. Aurora studied it, noticing the names of Sirius and Andromeda. I think they were disowned. A pop was heard and they turned and saw an old house elf. He had white hair growing out his ears with a large nose that took of most of his face. He was hunched over with a dirty pillowcase for his clothes. Worthless dog brought blood traitors into my mistress's house. I take it you're Creature? Aurora questioned. Creature ignored her and turned to Harry, the brat who brought the Dark Lord down. My poor mistress. Aurora growled at the elf and drew her wand. Leave now. Creature disappeared with a pop. Well, that was pleasant, Harry said. They moved away from the tapestry. Harry and Wayne started using the scouring charm liberally across the room. Aurora went about categorizing items in the room. She was just going by a grandfather clock when it chimed and shot a bolt out from the timepiece. "Ah!" she screamed as it embedded itself in the wall. The boys turned with their wands up ready to fire a spell. They saw Aurora staring at the clock. Who in Merlin's name needs a clock that can kill? That came out of the clock, Harry asked, staring at the bolt, and his eyes widened as it disappeared. Aurora vanished the whole clock. "Damn blacks," she muttered, going back to look over items. A few minutes later she heard Harry, "Well, that's just nasty." "Is that blood?" Wayne asked. That got Aurora's attention and she walked over to where the boys were standing. On a table was a crystal decanter filled with a thick red liquid. "Yeah," Harry said, familiar with the substance from all his injuries. Aurora tapped the decanter with her wand and the blood vanished from it. She conjured a tag and wrote on it, "Was filled with blood." "We'll just leave that for Sirius," Aurora said. They finished with the room quickly after that and moved on to 2 guest bedrooms. A bathroom that was filled with mold and a ghoul that charged at the 3. Reducto. Aurora sent the curse at the ghoul's legs and they splattered into nothing, leaving only the top half. It still tried to crawl its way to them, growling all the while. Aurora finished it with another redactor curse. It left behind a greenish-brown liquid. Aurora transfigured an old toothbrush into a potions vial and put some of the liquid into it before vanishing the rest. "Slughorn will be able to use this." Harry and Wayne made faces. "That's just wrong," Harry said, and Wayne nodded. "Right, I'm going to teach you the bubble head charm before we tackle this." She gestured to the possible plague-ridden bathroom. "The wand movement is just a tap to your mouth and circle up to your nose. And the incantation is ebublio." She demonstrated and they watched as a bubble encased her mouth and nose. She walked into the bathroom without the smell or mold inhibiting her. Harry and Wayne both attempted the spell. "Ebublio," Harry muttered, circling his wand tightly around his mouth and nose. The bubble stretched around the area. Harry grinned at his mum. "Cool," he said, and it was slightly distorted. "You beep," Wayne muttered as he kept attempting the spell. Wayne tried to control the circle. "Your wand makes more," Aurora said patiently. "Focus and slow your breathing. You're not getting tested on this." Wayne nodded and took a deep calming breath before attempting the spell, ebublio. He encircled his mouth and nose, and this time with a bubble. "Yes." Wayne cheered and punched his fist at the air. "Now get in here and help us sterilize this pit," Aurora said playfully. Wayne snapped a salute. "Yes, ma'am." The 3 took to liberally using any cleaning charm they knew over every square inch of the bathroom. Aurora vanished all of the leftover soaps and shampoos and makeup in the bathroom. As they finished, all that was left was a plain shower, bath, toilet, and sink, everything else needing to be destroyed. They moved on to the final doors in the hallway. They were double doors made from a dark ebony wood with the black crest on them. "Stand back a bit, boys," Aurora said. She ran her wand over the doors and dispelled a rather old locking ward. She recognized it from her father's office. The doors open into a small library with a study off to one side. "We're going to leave this to Sirius and my father, if Sirius wants the help." Harry looked at her curiously. "The blacks are thought to have some of the darkest tones in Wizarding Britain, and that is the Lord's study." "So should we go to the next floor?" Wayne asked. He was interrupted by a small pop. "Worthless Master Sirius says lunch is ready for blood traders and mudbloods," Creature announced before popping away. "He's just delightful, ain't he?" Wayne quipped. "I think he's been alone with dear Walburga too long," Aurora said. Harry sniggered at Sirius's mum's name. "Can't we get Sirius another elf?" Harry asked quietly. Aurora shook her head. "There are not many unbound house elves." "Why?" Wayne asked as they made their way down the creaky stairs. Aurora sent a spell at them and the squeaking stopped. "House elves have symbiotic relationship with wizarding magic. They need it to remain strong and healthy." "You think that's part of Creature's problem?" Harry asked. Aurora paused and looked thoughtful. "It very well could be. The only person he was bound to these last years was Sirius. The Dementors were feeding on Sirius's magic at the time, so yes, it could have impacted Creature." "Well reasoned, Harry," she said, giving his shoulder a squeeze. Harry had grown once again, sprouting up a few more inches, as had Wayne. The two boys had also put on more muscle this summer, with Sirius and Remus showing them Muggle exercises to work on strength. Both boys were eager to train for Quidditch, as the front runners for beaters from other houses were all older than the two again. They entered the kitchen and were greeted by the smells of roast chicken and vegetables. Sirius and the other adults grinned at them when they entered. "Well, at least he can cook," Wayne said, looking at the food. "Already checked for poison, so dig in," Sirius said with a laugh. Nobody was sure whether he was joking or not. "Cheers," Remus said wryly. The boys shrugged and took that to heart and started devouring their food. The adults shared a look before chuckling softly. Continuous magic use did have a tendency to make growing wizards and witches hungry. "So how come home is in the middle of a Muggle area?" Wayne asked before taking a swig of butterbeer. "My great however many times grandfather," Sirius waved his hand in a matter-of-fact movement, "Licorice Black moved us here." Sirius sat back in his chair, rocking back on it so two legs were up in the front. The Black Castle was in need of repair and was a drafty old place apparently, and too well known for his taste. He sold it to the goblins for quite a profit. "He sold it to the goblins?" Aurora asked with a look of bemusement. She hadn't known that. What she did know was that the Blacks notoriously detested all other sentient beings. Sirius smirked. "Yep. There was a mine on the property. We still make 30% of what the goblins mine from it." He was a paranoid bastard and figured Muggle London was perfect to hide in, not to mention the Fidelius charm he used. "Worked rather well," Cyril said with a faint grin. "I do not think anyone would believe this is where the Black ancestral home now lays." "What about the other Blacks that have been here, wouldn't they know?" Harry asked. "We only allowed them in by portkey." Sirius shrugged. His bored gaze turned into a smirk when Harry and Wayne finished their butterbeers. Cyril and Remus snorted while Aurora openly laughed and Dawn tried to hide her snickers. "Wah?" Wayne and Harry both asked and turned to look at each other. Their mouths dropped open. Your hair," Harry said, back pointing. Wayne was currently sporting snakes coming out of his head rather like Medusa, while Harry's hair had turned Weasley red and stuck straight out in two braids tied with powder blue bows. "Oi, you're dead," the boys shouted as Sirius transformed into Padfoot and took off out of the kitchen. The boys gave chase, bounding around the house trying to curse the large dog. The four remaining occupants of the kitchen burst out into laughter until the sound of crashing glass was heard. Dawn groaned. "They better not have broken anything we just spent hours fixing." "Harry, this is not funny." Izzy's shout rang through the whole McDougal Keep. Quite the feat. The McDougal Keep was located on an isle in the Scottish Highlands. The keep was nearly as old as Hogwarts, or so the McDougal family history states. The MacDougals of old had made their money through fisheries and falconers. The current MacDougals were still accomplished hunters. Izzy's second brother Duncan took over the hawking business for his father. Izzy marched out to the pit where her third eldest brother Craig was teaching Harry, Wayne, and Neville to wrestle, more so the first two. Craig was on the shorter side but had the strength of a bear. Wayne looked up away from Craig at Izzy's shout and Craig took advantage and pinned him to the ground. "Ah, bugger, I give," Wayne called only to laugh as Izzy came into sight. Her favorite Pride of Portree jersey was no longer pristine purple but had in dark gray letters emblazoned on the front spelling Falmouth and on the back in white falcons. "It won't come out," Izzy shouted, her voice taking a high-pitched hysterical tone. Mum and Pa both tried. "Do you know how hard it is to find a Malky jersey?" Wayne was rolling on the sand pit laughing while Neville was doubled over in laughter at the tone of her voice and when she stomped her foot. Susan was behind her snickering quietly. Harry had an absolutely deviant smirk on his face and his eyes twinkled. "That's for my shoes." Izzy spluttered, her golden brown eyes wide with disbelief. That was almost 4 years ago. At this point Craig started laughing as well. She threw her hands up and turned to storm back into the keep. "Traitor," she growled at the giggling Susan. Susan just grinned, following Izzy with a wink at Harry. A loud boom sounded around the aisle, letting everyone know that dinner was ready. "Let's go, lads," Craig said, waving the boys into the keep. "You all picked those moves up quickly. Even you, Neville." Neville gave a grin. Be nice to Pop Malfoy 1. Craig let out a booming laugh as they came into the dining hall of Castle Scathlin. The dining hall was used for all McDougal meals as all but Fergus lived at their ancestral home. It was also common for Izzy's 2 McDougal uncles and their families to stop by. Today, though, it seemed only Isabel's immediate family was in attendance. Her father and eldest brother had flown home for the meal. Izzy's father owned a large fishing company and her eldest brother Ian worked with him. Also present was Isabel's closet sibling in age, the youngest brother Lennox. "Ox, what are you doing home?" Craig asked as he helped himself to a large turkey sandwich. Lennox looked a bit unsure as he started to gather his plate. Everyone looked to him in confusion. Lennox, despite being the smallest and of a more weedy build than his brothers, had probably the most boisterous personality of Clan McDougal. "I have some news," Lennox stated, adjusting his silver circular-rimmed glasses. Lennox worked at the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Magical Games and Sports. He worked in the offices responsible for overseeing Quidditch stadiums. He was helping with the World Cup stadium. "And Gregor McDougal," Izzy's father prompted. Lennox shot Harry an apologetic look. "Dumbledore took the open post of Director of International Magical Cooperation. It will be announced in tomorrow's Prophet. I only know because Director Bagman can't keep a secret to save his life." Lennox sighed in relief when Harry just shrugged and looked curious. Harry's reaction helping to stave off both his sister's and mother's protest. Iona McDougal had become very fond of the 3 boys her daughter was close to. "It's not all that surprising," Ian surmised. "Dumbledore is the most influential wizard, still. That doesn't bother me," Harry said in his quiet voice that still managed to silence the large gathering. "I can still ignore his existence no matter where he's at." "That might be harder than you think," Lennox said, adjusting his glasses again. Everyone at the table looked at him again, this time with narrowed eyes. He was growing more uncomfortable, a new feeling for him. Fudge, in an attempt to save face and redirect attention away from everything that has happened the past year, is reinstating the Tri-Wizard Tournament. Bloody hell. The curse came from both McDougal parents, Ian and Duncan. Craig and the other youngsters looked confused, Harry and Wayne the most. "What is this tourney?" Wayne asked. Craig, Neville, and Harry nodded with his question in agreement. Harry shot Susan a look. Susan looked at Izzy before shooting Harry a somewhat bewildered look. "I've only heard the name," Susan said. Iona spoke with her eyes narrowed in annoyance. "The Tri-Wizard Tournament is a magical competition between the 3 oldest magic schools in Europe. Hogwarts, Beauxbatons Academy of Magic in France, and Durmstrang Institute in Eastern Europe." Gregor picked up. "One competitor from each school is chosen to compete in a number of tasks which have in the past turned deadly." "Deadly?" Wayne asked his with surprise. Harry merely took everything in with silence. "Yes, deadly. The tournament was cancelled indefinitely after a cockatrice went on a rampage and killed 2 competitors and injured all 3 headmasters as well as 1 other judge." Gregor was frowning and his words were clipped. "Why would Dumbledore agree to this?" Craig asked with disbelief. "He didn't have a choice," Lennox grimaced. "It was already planned and paid for before he took up office. If we pull out now, it will be an insult to both the French and the Bulgarians. He did manage to get them to agree to an age limit. Only those who have reached adulthood will be able to compete." "I'll be back," Harry said quietly and pushed away from the table. Iona made to stand, but Izzy spoke up. "We got this." She and her friends stood leaving the table. Wayne took his plateful of sandwiches with him. They heard Gregor tell Lennox he needed to find a way to be at Hogwarts during the tournament. Harry found his feet moving of their own violation and they carried him to the large room he shared with Neville and Wayne while at McDougal Keep. The room was larger than their dorms at Hogwarts and had a balcony overlooking the loch. He stared out over the loch, watching the gentle sway of the water. Susan came up next to him and leaned over the balcony with her shoulder touching his. Harry looked to her and gave a slight smile. They turned back to their other friends. Izzy looked uncomfortable while Wayne seemed to be more carefree. He sat in a chair with his legs thrown over the arm. Neville stood leaning against the door frame. He had had a bit of a growth spurt and was still a bit awkward from it and nearly knocked over a table as he moved to take a seat. Harry shot him a smirk to which he replied with a 1-finger salute. Some of the tension broke and laughter was heard. All right, Harry, Neville asked. Harry unfolded his arms and placed them behind him on the stonework. Yeah, I'm good. Really? Izzy said skeptically. Harry smirked. Really? I'm more worried about what Mum or Sirius might do to the man. Wayne laughed loudly while Susan snorted with derision. Neville though looked thoughtful. Nev. Dumbledore still has a lot of support if he was able to get the job this fast and quietly. Neville replied. I know Bran Weil, angry with him over not checking on you, still supports his endeavors with the ICW. He looked remorsefully at Harry. Don't worry about it, Neville, Harry said quietly. I was mad, completely bloody pissed. Harry said, a heavy street accent coming through his emotions. He took some deep breaths and Susan placed her hand on his arm. The other three looked at that with little smirks but refrained from saying anything, not wanting to derail Harry. He sighed. Now I would just like to know why he told people I was fine. I know he's done good things and kept scores of people from dying, but I want to know why. Neville looked at his friends with a sly grin which never would have graced his face had he been friends with anyone else. Well, if he's going to be at Hogwarts, we can corner him and prank him until he tells you. The girls giggled while Harry cackled loudly with Wayne. Well, nice to see you're feeling better, Lennox said with bright grin as he walked onto the balcony. Thanks for the warning, Lennox, Harry said when he stopped laughing. Anytime. I thought you guys might want to know more about the tournament. I studied up on it when Bagman leaked it. They nodded and Lennox transfigured a chair for himself from a twig. Well, this bloody well beeps, Harry said looking at the book list in his hand. Ancient Runes has 2 texts. And one of these is all in hieroglyphs, Harry groaned. Izzy tried to look around Harry but the tall boy was blocking her from the bookshelf. Move, you big oaf, she pushed at him. Harry snickered but moved her and grabbed another book for her to see. Izzy huffed. If the title's in English, the book should be in English. Sirius and Remus both chuckled from a bit away. The 2 men were supervising the quintet of 14-year-olds for their school shopping. Originally it was going to be just Sirius, but Director Bones, Madame Longbottom, and Aurora protested, lamenting they would need to be bailed out of the ministry holding cells if Sirius was the only adult supervision. Remus had resigned his post only a few weeks ago. Someone had let slip to Rita Skeeter that Remus was a werewolf and howlers had flooded the headmistress' office. Aunt Minnie had told Remus over a family dinner that the board could stuff it, but Remus decided against it. He reasoned that some prejudiced student would be looking for a reason to report him. Instead of teaching, Remus was going to be staying with Sirius over the year as an advisor. Sirius having decided to take up the mantle of Lord Black at Andromeda's urging. Remus had always been the more level-headed one of the Marauders and agreed that someone would need to keep Sirius from cursing half the Wizengamot. If the title wasn't in English, we wouldn't know what book to get, Susan reasoned as Harry handed her a copy of the text. Thanks, blushed a bit. Wayne and Izzy shared an amused look with Sirius and Remus. Oof. Wayne groaned and rubbed his stomach where Harry elbowed him. Susan gave him a confused look. Nothing, he stammered out. Stop complaining, you 2 don't have to carry this. Izzy dropped a book bigger than the Bibles Harry used to see at the orphanage into Wayne's arms. Bloody hell, woman, Wayne cursed. Little warnin' next time. Remus and Sirius snickered, Remus casting a featherweight charm on the books. Neville grinned a wicked grin for a Gryffindor. Glad I took divination for once. He lifted his new course textbook that looked as slim as a magazine. All 4 Hufflepuffs turned and simultaneously gave him the bird, causing the growing teen to laugh out loud. Hurry it up, we still need to get to Madame Malkin's before we hit Harrods, Sirius said, checking his pocket watch. It was made from gold with the Potter family coat of arms carved onto the back. Harry had wondered at it the first time Sirius had pulled it out. Sirius had been surprised it had survived along with his wand at Azkaban. It had a traditional medieval English shield divided by a bend going from the top left to the bottom right. The left portion of the shield when done in color was gold and the right half in blue, Sirius had explained to him. Emblazoned on the gold half was a tower and on the blue was a stag. Dear Sirius, still slumming are you? Came a sneering yet delicate voice from behind Harry. Harry saw Remus stiffen and his eyes darken almost to amber. On Sirius the only tell of something was wrong was a hardening of his eyes which made them appear to be granite. Harry and Wayne turned. Wayne slid slightly in front of Izzy while Harry moved in front of Susan's wand arm, disguising that she had indeed pulled her wand. Sirius spun the pocket watch around before placing it back in his pocket. Harry's eyes hardened on the sight before him. Draco Malfoy, the blonde ponce who had been suspended for the rest of last year, stood glaring at both Sirius and Harry. Although Harry noticed the glare at Sirius was directed at the hand that flashed Sirius's Black family's head of House Ring. Sirius spoke in a patronizing but silky tone. "My dear cousin Sissy, and you must be the spawn of House Malfoy." Sirius grinned and added, "You look nothing like a Black," but then Sissy never did either. Draco's mother, or whom Harry rightly assumed was his mother, bristled at the words. Draco stupidly pulled his wand and stepped forward only to be jerked back by his mother. "Oh look, he has Lucis brain too. Trying to attack one of your heads of house, the superior one at that," Sirius said, causing the teens to smile widely. Then Sirius hit the ponce where it hurt. "Keep that up and I'll disinherit you." Draco snapped his mouth shut with an audible click while Lady Malfoy looked ready to turn into a harpy. Remus suddenly sported a wolfish grin, reminding his good friend just why he was a willing marauder. "Oh Padfoot, weren't you just saying something about inheritances?" Sirius grinned back. "Too right, my furry friend. I almost forgot." "Creature!" Sirius yelled sternly. The grumpy old house elf of the Black family appeared. He gave a lazy bow while rolling his eyes. "Disgraceful Master Black." Sirius narrowed his eyes at the elf while Harry and his friends tried to repress giggles. Remus looked amused at the whole situation and shot the teens a wink. "Batty old elf," Sirius shot back. Creature opened his mouth, but Harry cleared his throat and nodded to the two Malfoys. Sirius and Creature looked back and forth between Harry and the Malfoys. They both stopped arguing, and just as Lady Malfoy seemed ready to greet Creature, Sirius spoke. "The inheritance papers." Sirius snarked only to be stopped by Harry's nudge. "Please," Sirius added petulantly. Creature seemed to take pleasure in Sirius's misery and bowed to Harry before snapping his fingers and practically shoving papers at Sirius before disappearing. "You two need to bond over something other than pranking me," Sirius muttered to Harry. The laughter everyone had been suppressing came out in a fit of giggles. "Wankers," Sirius said. He was brought back to the situation at hand when Lady Malfoy curtly cut in. "We are waiting." Both she and Draco had identical sneers on their faces, and Narcissa had started to tap her heeled boot in annoyance. "Oh, still here," Sirius grinned. "Ah, that's right, inheritance." He handed over 2 letters with the names Draconis Lucius Malfoy on one and the other Narcissa Ursa Malfoy née Black. As soon as Narcissa and Draco took the letters, a flash red came over the parchment. Draco yelped at the shock the red burst gave off, while Narcissa paled to the point where she looked more pale than the Bloody Baron. She torn open the envelope and the teens could see that the address no longer said Black. "You bastard!" Narcissa shrieked in anger. Draco rushed to collect his note and nearly tore it in half when he ripped it open. "You can't do this, my father." He was interrupted by the 5 Reavers droning. "We'll hear about this." "You filthy blood traitors," Draco shouted, pulling his wand. All 5 whipped their wands out at him, but Remus and Sirius both stepped in front of them. Narcissa finally snapped out of her stupor and placed a hand on Draco's wrist rather tightly. She nodded to the gathering crowd, one that held multiple reporters. Draco glared but lowered his wand. "Come, Draco." She pushed him along and then glared at Sirius. "This is not over." She stalked off. Izzy discreetly sent a tripping jinx at the regal woman. Narcissa's feet tangled and the woman was sent into a display of second-hand robes. The letter Sirius had given her went fluttering along. Sirius chuckled and high-fived Izzy discreetly. Remus and Sirius led the group of teens out of the alley without knowing the letter had made it into a sprightly reporter's hands. The next day the headline of the Daily Prophet read, "Lady Malfoy and Scion Malfoy disinherited from the ancient and most noble House of Black." "Have fun and stay out of trouble," Cyril said while his wife hugged and kissed Ed, Harry, Wayne, and Susan goodbye. The boys looked innocently at Cyril while Susan rolled her eyes. Cyril sighed and looked to Susan. "Make sure they don't get arrested." The boys looked mock offended while Susan giggled. Cyril and Dawn had decided to stay home and skip seeing the World Cup final live. Cyril was not a fan of crowds and Dawn did not feel like braving the horror of wizards trying to camp while pretending to be muggles. Cyril pulled Aurora into a hug. "Have fun, sweetheart." Try to make Fudge squirm. Aurora laughed and gave her mother a hug before turning to the three teens. "All right, boys and girl, hold on." Aurora grinned at the teens and holding out an old leather glove. They all frowned but grabbed a hold as it flashed blue. Harry felt the jerking around his navel as the portkey sent them on their way in what felt like a twister. "Shite," Wayne groaned as he rubbed his ankle. They had slammed into the ground with force. Aurora landed a bit wobbly but managed to keep herself and Susan standing. Harry landed hard but rolled out of it. "Let me see," Aurora said while she snickered seeing Harry shake his head to clear it. He looked like a confused puppy. Wayne shook his head. "It's nothing, just rolled it." He took her hand and pulled himself up. She cocked an eyebrow at him. Wayne did a spiffy bow. "On my honor, madam," and bowed. "Right, let's go find the mangy mutt," Aurora said once the younger three were all on their feet. They smirked at her description for serious. They made it over to the entrance where a middle-aged man was taking tickets. "Well, you at least look normal," he said, taking their tickets. All four of them were dressed in jeans with Irish team t-shirts or sweaters on. "Strange day," he nodded as a wizard in bathrobe was trying to pay in galleons. Susan's eyes widened as they realized the man was a muggle. It's tradition for some of the supporters to dress ridiculously beforehand, makes the mood lighter." Her words caused the nearby Obliviator to step back from where he was advancing on the muggle. The man just shook his head. "Bit of a queer thing to do. Anyway, you're at plot 56 and 57, almost near that weird stadium." He pointed his towards the massive structure. "Thank you, sir," Aurora said and led the teens along. What in the hell is wrong with them using a muggle for tickets? Bloody idiots are probably going to cause permanent damage with all their obliviating. "You know, this place really screws with people sometimes," Harry said, referring to the wizarding world at large. "That tent has friggin' chimney." "Yes, well, wizards always like to show off when they get together," Aurora sighed as they started the long trek to find their plot. The crowd seemed to never end as they passed more and more wizards. "I don't think so." Aurora snapped off a spell when she saw Wayne and Harry trying to slip off to a sea of tents that were decked out in red, green, and black flags that had a haze surrounding them. "Oi!" They both yelped, rubbing their arms where a pinching hex hit. They turned back to Aurora, who merely raised an aristocratic eyebrow at them. They both sheepishly looked to the ground and Susan giggled. Aurora pointed at them to resume walking and they trudged on only to regain their spirits when they passed a Dutch section where three young wizards were racing their brooms, giving off orange smoke trails. Aurora shook her head at them while a wall shot up in front of the racers, who abruptly stopped only to be grounded by four oars working security detail. A large boo went up from the crowd as the boys were given tickets. Susan and the boys laughed as Tonks flipped the crowd off and then waved to the group of four. "Watch her, guys," Tonks said, bouncing over to give them a quick hello. "Ready for an Irish win?" she asked, pulling Susan in for a hug, and then Aurora. She gave the boys both a fist bump. "Hell yeah," Wayne shouted and did a little jig, much to the laughter of the others. "Tonks, let's go," a more senior oar shouted over to her. Tonks grinned and waved again before taking off with her fellow oarer in the direction of fireworks. "So much for statute of secrecy," Aurora muttered. The three teens chuckled as they moved on. They started to get closer to what seemed like the more familiar territory. They passed the Irish section where they saw Seamus Finnegan and Ronald Weasley hanging out. Seamus was decked head to toe in green, white, and orange, while Ronald had on an oversized leprechaun top hat. Further on they came upon the Bulgarian camp where nearly every tent seemed to be paying homage to Victor Krum, the Bulgarian seeker. Wayne whistled low. "They really like Krum." Susan nodded as they passed a tent that showed a moving image of Krum catching a snitch. "Not to show my disinterest, but why?" Susan asked. Wayne just stared stupidly at her. She rolled her eyes. "I know he's their seeker, but this is crazy." Harry chuckled. "He's the youngest seeker to ever play in a cup final and the only reason they've won most of their matches." As he finished they moved into what was decidedly the English area, the smell of fish and chips prominent along with English flags and more Ireland supporters. "Over there," Aurora said, pointing to an unremarkable group of tents compared to most others. The only odd feature being how large they were. The 3 tents were gathered around a roaring fire pit. Sitting around the pit was the complete McDougal clan. The McDougal clan all gave simultaneous chorus of hellos as Izzy came up to hug Susan and the boys. The booming Scottish voices startling some of those around their campsite. At the chorus of voices, Neville, Sirius, and Remus came strolling out of the tent on the far right. It was a plain nondescript canvas tent, while the 2 next to it were decked in the Scottish flag, but other than that they seemed perfectly normal. "Pups!" Sirius shouted upon seeing Harry and the others. It was followed by, "and puppettes." "Ow! Damn woman, what was that for?" Sirius shouted, rubbing his shoulder and glaring at Aurora. "Refer to me or any woman as any kind of dog again and I'll do far worse," Aurora said with a menacing look. Sirius paled. "I meant fine ladies." "Better." Aurora deadpanned as Remus and Neville snickered behind him. Harry grinned as he jogged over and was pulled into a bear hug by Sirius and Remus. Wayne and Neville greeted each other with a high five. "Well, now that you're all here, how about we wander around the merchandise?" Remus asked the teens. Sirius had volunteered to take them around before the match would start. The other adults seemed to think Remus would keep them all out of trouble and nodded. "Just put your stuff away first," Aurora said and motioned to the black tent that Sirius, Remus, and Neville came out of. The 3 teens ducked into the tent with Harry and Wayne stopping short. "Shite," Wayne mumbled, "this is nicer than my house." Harry shared a look with him, then moved around the full-sized living quarters that were spelled into a tent. There was a kitchen where currently Creature was walking around mumbling and drinking what looked like a cup of tea. "Master Harry." Creature straightened up and walked from the kitchen into the great room that was furnished with fine ebony wood furniture and had a large wizarding radio on a hearth above an unlit fireplace. "Creature." Harry grinned. "How'd he take being a fish?" Harry and Wayne, with the help of Isabel, managed to brew a potion that turned Sirius into a fish for 2 days. Nobody seemed inclined to change Sirius back, so he stayed in a small fishbowl for the past couple of days. Creature chuckled. It seemed that the more Sirius recovered, and with bringing the Tonks family back into the Black family, Creature was recovering some of his own magic, growing stronger and saner. Well, it's sane at least to Harry and the other Reavers, even Wayne. Blissful quietness. The teens chuckled. "Mistress Bones is with Mistress Sinistra through there." He pointed to a door painted silver off to the left. Then gestured to another door that was painted in red. "Masters Harry and Wayne are through that door." Susan went to check out the room she was sharing with Aurora while Harry and Wayne disappeared into the other. The room was set up with 3 large 4-post beds. One with a green bedspread had been claimed by Neville. Harry tossed his pack on the bed with the blue bedspread and Wayne tossed his onto the remaining bed, which was silver. The room had a large window cut out spelled to show the outside of the tent but not the inside. Off to another side was a door that held a full bathroom. Harry checked it out. "I love magic," he murmured. Wayne chuckled. "In it bloody awesome. Wonder if Sirius would let me borrow it." A knock sounded on the open door and they turned and saw Susan grinning at them. Izzy's starting to bounce in place. The 2 boys laughed and joined Susan, stepping back out the tent. Neville was standing with a hand on Isabel's shoulder, somewhat holding her in place, much to amusement of everyone else around the camp. "Remus, keep them away from the Caribbean camp," Aurora called as they left. Remus grinned and nodded. The group of 5 teens and 2 adults started to make their way through the crowds. "Where to first?" Remus asked the troop. "Have you guys seen the Weasleys?" "We told the twins we stopped by." Harry spoke. "I think I saw a troop of Weasley redheads over that way," Sirius said and cocked his thumb to the side. They moved through the tents and smaller campsites for a good 10 minutes before they heard a loud shout of, "Fred and George." Sirius snickered. "Found them." The Weasley twins had come by with the others at Grimwald Place, under the guise of helping out Sirius, but really learning from the last 2 true Morators and planning with the other Reavers. They found that despite being younger than the Weasley patriarch and matriarch, both Remus and Sirius fought with them during the war. Arthur Weasley had been one of the first to stop by and visit Sirius on a social call. They had even had a large dinner gathering with Sirius, the Reavers, Aurora, Remus, and the rest of the Weasleys, whom were at Hogwarts. Molly Weasley, everyone agreed, could cook like nobody's business and had even managed to work with Creature. During one supper the Reavers found out that Molly Weasley was a member of the Pruitt family. The Pruitt family were a solidly light family of the Sacred 28. The very old and very pure-blooded families of the wizarding world. Molly and her aunt were the only two left. Molly's older twin brothers Fabian and Gideon were killed in the war. Harry, Susan, and Neville had sat down and spoken to Molly about her brothers, and she in turn told them stories of their parents that the two Pruitt males had related to her. Molly had even babysat the three along with her brood occasionally during the war. After that dinner Molly and Arthur had adopted the three orphaned wizards into their family, offering them their support if the three teens ever needed it. They came to a campsite where a modest tent was set up and a roaring fire was still sparking various colors and a bit widely. Arthur was shaking his head at the twins while Percy looked murderous, though it was damped by the fact that he was missing one eyebrow and covered in soot. The newcomers had to hide their laughter as Percy ranted about having to meet Dumbledore. "Well, are you?" Fred said, followed by George, "a wizard or not?" Percy glared at them and waved his wand, cleaning himself up, but that did nothing to regrow his eyebrow. He jammed a hat on his head, covering it, and stalked off. Once he was gone the whole campsite broke into chuckles. Arthur had a long-suffering look on his face. Was that really necessary? He asked the twins, but was answered by two more deeper voices and a more feminine one. Yes. The voices synced together. The Reavers looked and saw Ginny standing between two older Weasley boys. One was tall and lithe, handsome young man with his long flame red hair pulled back into a low ponytail with a leather band that had the Weasley family crest on it. Dangling from one ear was what looked like a dragon fang earring. The other elder Weasley had slightly shorter but jagged-cut red hair. He was stocky like the twins and had on a muscle shirt that displayed impressive arms. He was covered in freckles and the occasional burn scars. "Come on, Dad," he was being a prat. The eldest, whom from the twins' descriptions was Bill, spoke. Arthur just shook his head. He turned and saw the others and smiled, waving them over. "Remus, Sirius, come meet my oldest sons." "Hello, boys and girls." He gave them all a handshake. "Bill, Charlie, meet Lord Sirius Black and Remus Lupin." They all exchanged handshakes, and then Arthur gestured to the teens. "Then we have Susan, Isabel, Wayne, Neville, and Harry." Arthur reeled of the names with the ease of a practiced father of many. "Friends of your brothers." The twins preened as Bill and Charlie now looked slightly worried at the mention of them. It only increased when the Reavers smirked. "Right, well, at least we live in a separate country," Bill said, exchanging handshakes and giving first Isabel and then Susan's offered hands a key. Both girls blushed. Harry unknowingly narrowed his eyes at Bill, causing Sirius, Remus, and Arthur to share grins. George and Fred told us about Snape's prank." "Well done," Charlie said, grinning. "Bloody bat should be fed to dragons," he murmured. "We can't feed him to any of your dragons, they get indigestion," Bill quipped. "True, though that damn Horntail could do with a bit of discomfort," Charlie said, rubbing a recent burn on his arm. "Damn," Wayne whistled lowly at the burn. It looked recent and still painful. Charlie grinned at the boy's disgusted yet impressed look. It's breeding season. Never thought being at World Cup could get even better. But being away from a hormonal pregnant Hungarian Horntail who's about to clutch is a plus." "How many dragons on the reserve are being bred?" Remus asked. 5 this time, plus the Hungarian Horntail. We have a Chinese Firebolt, Swedish Short Snout, common Welsh Green, and a Peruvian Vipertooth." "That's some dangerous breeds," Remus replied with wide eyes. "Don't I bloody know it. Idiot ministry." Charlie was cut off by his father elbowing him in the stomach. Charlie rubbed the back of his head. "Right, never mind," he said, noticing the look from his father. The twins looked sharply at the three elder Weasleys. Bill chuckled and smiled winningly. "Right, we told some of the old chums we meet with them, so bye." He steered Charlie away from the campsite and the twins. The twins turned to their younger friends. "They won't tell us something," Fred said. George added, "But so far we've gotten Charlie to sleep outside." He grinned. The Reavers chuckled, but it faded as Mr. Weasley fixed all the pranksters with a look. "Which is exactly why you're not allowed to leave the campsite," Arthur stated. The twins grumbled and Ginny looked put out also. The Reavers had come to know that Ginny Weasley had just as big of a mischievous streak as her brothers and apparently was the only member of the family Bill and Charlie would not prank back. Ginny had snickered when Ron complained loudly at family dinner saying it was her perk for having to live with all the boys. Isabel crowed with her over that. "You all can't leave the site?" Wayne asked. "Nope, we're grounded," Ginny huffed sitting next to the fire. Arthur didn't look to be the least bit slightly sorry and shared a smile with Remus and Sirius. "You guys want us to bring you anything or get you anything?" Neville asked. "We were headed to the concessions." The twins and Ginny looked at their dad with pleading eyes. "Fine, one thing only," Arthur said, and the three whooped and took off into the tent. They came back with 3 different Gringotts bags. "Can you get me one of those commemorative programs for the Irish?" Ginny said, bouncing over to Isabel, taking out some coins. Izzy nodded and pocketed the coin. The twins were pooling their coins and seemed to be having one of their more silent conversations before they separated out a pile of coins. "Get us one of those Quigley and Connolly figurines. You know, the ones that show them doing their moves." Fred and George spoke together. "Sure mates, we'll be back in a bit," Wayne said, taking the money carefully. They all said their goodbyes and the 3 remaining Weasley kids started to help their dad with the campsite. "If you spot the chasers, tell 'em we said hi," Fred called out. The 4th years and their guardians for the day left the Weasleys with a promise to drop their stuff off on the way back to their own campsite. They trekked through the rest of the English camp and made their way closer to the massive stadium. It loomed in the background of the stands. It was massive and easily dwarfed the largest buildings Harry had seen in London growing up. It was still quite a ways from the merchandise stands, but a golden light seemed to emit from the stadium even during the day, making it seem like a beacon. "Wow," Isabel whispered in a bit of awe. "That's got to be the biggest pitch ever." "They've been building it for a year now," Remus mentioned to the teens. "All the games are played in here during the tourney, so it needs to be able to hold a massive number of wizards and witches," he added. Wayne and Harry nodded at him, thinking on how much larger it was than some of the sporting arenas in the Muggle world. As they crossed into the merchandise area, the noise increased almost 5-fold. There were stands everywhere selling everything from pumpkin juice to autographed racing brooms. The sellers were plying their wares in various languages, as nearly every team was represented by at least one booth. Of course, the majority of booths were decked out in the Irish gear, followed by the Bulgarian booths. Programs. Programs. A man dressed in robes bearing the Irish flag was shouting and had sparks of fireworks going off around him. He was competing with a Bulgarian seller who was decked out in red and black and had a flag featuring Viktor Krum suspended behind him. Izzy bounced over to the Irish seller with Susan following at a more sedate pace. 3 programs, Izzy said, handing over the coins as the Irish seller sent up another firecracker. This one took the appearance of a leprechaun that danced a jig and stuck its tongue out at the Bulgarian seller, much to the amusement of the Irish fans. "Does she ever stop bouncing?" Wayne muttered to Harry and Neville. The boys chuckled. "Nope, and now she's hit the Honeyduke's stand," Neville groaned. "Right, I'll go limit that," Remus said, and jogged over to the 2 girls while the boys went in search of something to buy. The first thing they did was to pick up the figurines for Fred and George and handed them off to Sirius to hold on to. "China, look at that," Wayne said as they stepped into a tent selling in-game equipment. "That's Moran's broom from the league champion win against Ballycastle 4 years ago. She broke the record for single-game goals. The Nimbus 2000 that was on display featuring her signature had a picture of her hoisting the league trophy. Damn, she's hot, even with Quidditch robes on," Harry admired the poster. "Yeah," Wayne and Neville agreed. "Pigs," they heard and turned to see Isabel and Susan standing next to them. Both girls looked annoyed at the boys. Wayne just grinned at them. "Hey, foam fingers," Harry said, pointing out a vendor nearby, and took off, hoping to get away from Susan's annoyed look. Neville decided that was in his best interest too, as Wayne set off to antagonize Izzy. Susan made a retreat as well. Harry and Neville both got foam fingers for the Irish, while Harry bought himself and Susan an overlarge felt top hat in Ireland colors with leprechauns dancing on them. Neville bought himself a flashing shamrock necklace. "Oi, love birds, get over here," Harry yelled out to Wayne and Isabel, who abruptly stopped and moved 5 feet apart from each other. "Arsebiscuit," Wayne chirped as the 2 came over. Isabel made similar purchases before the 5 went past some golden omnioculars. They were advertised as the latest model. You can replay action, slow everything down, and they flash up a play-by-play breakdown if you need it. Bargain. 10 galleons each, the vendor said as the teens stopped in front of them. They all looked interested but did not want to seem to spring for them, especially Wayne. "Nah, I'm good," Wayne said a bit dejectedly. Izzy pouted. "I spent my allowance already." The other 4 teens looked a bit worried at that. "We noticed," Harry snarked. "You 3 have any?" Sirius asked the other 3. They shook their heads in the negative. "Well, in that case we'll take 5, Sirius said, watching the expressions on the teens' faces change to smiles. The vendor handed them over to the teens as Sirius paid. "Why don't we get back to the tent?" "Right. This is where we leave you," Gregor McDougal's voice boomed as they came to a break in the stands. The large group made the small hike to the stadium through the lantern-lit path. The McDougals were splitting off at the box section about 20 rows down from the top box where the others would be watching the game. "Enjoy, and watch the sugar," he called as Sirius started the group up further. "You think they make some lifts for these?" Neville puffed out a breath. "What's the matter? Longbottom can't upstairs. These ones don't even move." The sneering tone had them all turning with looks of annoyance. Standing a few rows up was Draco Malfoy along with his mother and father. Narcissa glared at Sirius and acted as if she smelt something funny. Lucius was sneering but doing a far better job at hiding most of his intentions. "Malfoy," Wayne said contemptuously, "you really are shite at insults. Me Muggle grandma could out-curse you. Bloody poofter," Wayne added, and the 5 teens snickered while Sirius, Remus, and Aurora kept their eyes on the Malfoy parents. Malfoy started forward but his father placed his snakehead walking cane in front of the boy. He shot Draco a venomous look. Draco looked down. "Black, you really do keep fascinatingly low company. How your parents never managed to beat that out of you I'll never know." Lucius sneered. Sirius gave a bark of rough laughter. "Some of us have spines. Comes with resisting the imperious curse too," he said with a small grin. "Is that right, Moony?" "Aurora." The other 2 adults nodded, agreeing with him, enjoying the withering look Malfoy shot them. Harry couldn't help it and added, "Oh yeah, that's right. Grandfather was just saying half of Fudge's problems were being surrounded by weak-willed idiots." "You're one of the idiots." The other teens snickered as Lucius quickly started turning red and went to grab the handle of his cane. Sirius, Remus, and Aurora already had their wands in their hands. "Watch her, cousin," came the cheerful voice of Tonks. She was in jeans and Irish gear but still had her Auror's badge attached to her sleeve. She flashed her arm badge towards Lucius. "And you must be Nuncle Lucy," Tonks said with a wicked grin. "I don't think we've met. I'm your niece Aurora Tonks." She stressed her title and the Malfoys stepped back. "I do not have any nieces," Narcissa sneered. "Now sissy, I think the correct phrase would be I have no nephews, considering we are the ones with the black name now." The older woman who Harry recognized as Andromeda Tonks stood behind Tonks said with a grin. Next to her was an older gentleman, tall with blonde hair trimmed short. He was on the portly side but his grin seemed to light up the stands. He seemed to be enjoying his daughter's and wife's reunion with their family. Narcissa Malfoy turned in a huff and walked into the private booth they were standing in front of. Andromeda seemed to be fighting a smirk. Lucius glared. "Enjoy the festivities while you can," he said in silky yet sneering tone. "Dromeda," Sirius said when they were gone. He turned and pulled her into a hug. "We spied the trio and thought we should come down. Given Dora's supposed to keep her badge on her," the regal-looking brunette said as she pulled back from the hug. "Thanks for the invite, Sirius." Ted came over and shook his hand. "Why don't we move before these people get any more annoyed?" The others looked and saw they had caused a bit of a traffic jam. "Right," Aurora said and continued leading the group on up to the top box, which was roped off with a gaudy red velvet. 2 Aurors were standing guard and checked their tickets before letting in the crew. "Ah, and here are my guests," Cornelius Fudge said with a grandiose gesture. "Lord Black, a most talented wizard who we're very glad to be hosting. And of course, his godson Harry Potter." Fudge came over trying to wrap his arms around the 2, as he went to introduce them to a fellow wizarding group dressed in fine robes that looked to be for more colder climate. They both ducked Fudge's arms but did move to shake the hands with Minister Ablansk, Bulgaria. the man said with a thick accent. He did not seem inclined to say anything else. Right, well, we're taking our seats. Fudge, don't touch me, Sirius said and motioned all of them forward. Neville, Harry, Wayne, Isabel, Susan and Tonks took seats in the front row of the box, while Sirius, Aurora, Remus, and the Tonks took seats behind them. Harry looked back and saw Fudge still floundering at Sirius blowing past him. He recovered and went back to speaking to the Bulgarian Minister of Magic. Harry had to smirk. The man did not seem to be anywhere near fluent in English, leaving Fudge to look even more idiotic. Andromeda caught his smirk and laughed quietly, sending him a wink. Are you all excited for the new year? Andromeda asked as the teens turned to talk to the adults before the match began. Sort of, Susan answered with a dubious look. They may have already found out about a certain event being held, Aurora added. Really? Andromeda asked, surprised, thinking Aurora might have told them despite being forbidden to by the school. Sirius had mentioned to her that Aurora proved herself a daughter of a bartender with the tirade of curses she let loose upon finding out about the Triwizard tournament. As she spoke, a large man in black and yellow striped Quidditch robes walked in with a flourish. Ready for the best match in England, the man said in a boisterous voice. No hard feelings when you lose. He jovially spoke while vigorously shaking the hand of the Bulgarian minister. Care for a bet, Cornelius? He then said, turning to Fudge and clapping him on the shoulders, causing Fudge to fall forward somewhat. I don't think that's quite appropriate, Ludo, Fudge mumbled. Isabel grinned. My brother works for him, she told Andromeda. That would explain that then, Andromeda said, causing her husband to chuckle. He never changes, does he? Ted said with a grin. You know Bagman? Wayne asked with wide eyes. He's one of the best beaters to play for Wimborne. Ted chuckled. I worked as a team healer for Wimborne for a while. Wayne and Isabel both got wide eyes looking at Ted with awe. Ludo, Ted called out, come here for a second. Healer Tonks. Ludo came over and pulled Ted into a bear hug. Head still feels great after that last bludger, thanks to you. Truthfully, I'm not sure that was me or your hard head. You have some fans that want to meet you. He gestured to the teens. This is Wayne Hopkins and Isabel McDougal, both the Quidditch fanatics. McDougal, your brother's ox. Ludo grinned as Isabel nodded. Good lad him. He pulled out a quill. Want me to sign anything for ya? Isabel grabbed her program and practically shoved it at him. Wayne had him sign his omniculars. And this is Neville Longbottom, Susan Bones, and Harry Potter. Ted finished the introductions. Ludo's eyes widened as he glanced at Harry. Harry's green eyes and scars making him a focus. Merlin's beard. It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Potter. He clapped him on the back as he had Fudge. Harry stiffened and Aurora glared at Ludo. Harry and Wayne are beaters for Hufflepuff, Ted added. Ludo grinned even wider than he already was, reminding Harry of the Joker from Batman. My old house. I'll have to come to match and make sure you're doing it proud. Maybe I'll bring a few coaches to the match, boys. Both Wayne and Harry looked surprised, but then smiles stretched over their faces and they nodded vigorously. Blimey, that'd be bloody awesome, Wayne. Ludo looked like he was about to say something else but was interrupted by Fudge. Ludo, we need to start. He looked a bit put out with how well Ludo was getting on with his guests. Right, duty calls, Ludo said and moved to the front of the box. He placed his wand to his throat and his voice came out as booming as a thunderclap. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final match of the 1994 Quidditch World Cup. A huge roar sounded throughout the stadium. Now let's hear some noise for the Irish. As he said that, green, orange, and white fireworks in the shape of leprechaun flared to life. Core, those are real leprechauns, Wayne called out as he looked through his omnioculars. The others quickly investigated using theirs as the leprechaun broke up and the tiny leprechauns flooded the stadium. More than a few allotted over to the minister's box and started showering it with gold coins. Then a boom was heard as the Irish team flew out and over the stadium in an arrowhead formation with green smoke trailing their brooms. The crowd, if possible, grew even louder. And welcome the Bulgarians, Ludo announced, drawing out the country name. At this, down on the pitch flashes of fire went off, drawing attention to the pitch where a contingent of beautiful women with golden white hair strut out onto the pitch in a seductive dance. Their skin practically glowed ethereally. They were dressed in red and black dresses that hugged their curves. As they danced, the stadium grew quiet before a buzz-like din rose higher and higher. In the minister's box, Harry, Neville, and Wayne's eyes were fixed on the women down below. Wayne looked to be drooling while Neville was frozen in place. Harry started to lean forward and sway in place in time with the women. Ludo was in a similar state to Wayne, while Sirius and even Ted looked on dreamily. Remus looked amused at it all and shared a glance with the women of the group. Isabel and Susan looked confused and annoyed with the boys. The bang of a deep drum rang out, snapping the crowd out of its trance as the women stopped dancing. The Bulgarian team flew in with drums playing their national anthem. The last Bulgarian to fly in was the youngest player on the pitch. He flew around the stadium doing a series of tricks and acrobatics as the crowd roared, "Crumb! Crumb! Crumb!" He flew to a stop in front of the minister's box with his hand raised into the air and punching the sky. The teen was tall and lanky with a hooked nose that looked like a hawk with dark hair and eyes. He flew off to join his team. Harry turned to the adults behind. "What was that? I feel like I just woke up." He still had a bit of stupefied look on his. "Yes, who are they?" Susan said a bit sullenly. "Those, my dear, are Vila," Sirius said with a lascivious grin. He stood looking to get a better look at the Vila. Aurora rolled her eyes and smacked him on the back of the head. "Down, dog." She snapped out. Sirius pouted and sat. "Vila are semi-human women that have the power to enchant men." The boys grinned. "Yeah, they do," Wayne said, waggling his eyebrows. "They can also turn into harpy-like birds that throw fire," Aurora added. Wayne's expression faded into horror. "Shite," Harry whispered with Wayne and Neville nodding along. The girls smirked at that. "Remus, why didn't you turn into a drooling idiot?" Izzy asked, shooting a look at the boys. Wayne stuck his tongue out at her. Remus chuckled and tapped his forehead, one of the only benefits of the wolf. It is hard for magics that affect the mind to invade its more animal side. "Now our referee, Hassan Mustafa." Ludo's voice took over. They looked back, seeing the players had been introduced. The players mounted their brooms and Mustafa released the snitch. "The snitch is out. And the quaffle's up." Bagman's voice started the call of the match. The Irish quickly pulled out head with the quaffle. Moran takes it down the pitch, passes to Troy and back to Moran, back to Troy. Score 10-0. The Irish take the first strike. Harry was practically glued to his omnioculars. The match was faster than any he had ever seen, including the few professional matches he went to. Even Bagman was having trouble at times keeping up with the Irish chasers, resorting to simply calling out their names. Harry's omnioculars slowed the match, and across his sight flashed Hawk's head formation as the Irish went down on another scoring run. "Crumb seen the snitch." Ludo's voice rang out, and Harry tore his gaze away from the chasers to watch as Crumb took off on a straight dive with the Irish seeker behind him. Harry looked closer but could not see the snitch. "It's faint," Harry called just as Crumb pulled up, leaving Lynch no time. Lynch slammed onto the pitch with a crunch. "Oh," Susan said in sympathy with a grimace on her face. "That was bloody fantastic," Izzy shouted at the same time. Susan and Neville shared a look as the other two boys agreed with her. "That was a beautiful Wronski feint. Perfect." Lynch never even guessed. Bagman's voice rang out as Metawizards rushed on to the pitch. After a few minutes, Lynch got up wobbly and mounted his broom, flying off with blood still soaking his uniform. "Oh, and that's a foul on the Bulgarian keeper," Bagman announced. Harry looked back to the hoops and the Irish chaser mullet with a black eye and raving at the Bulgarian keep. "A penalty has been awarded by Mustafa." This caused an uproar with the Vila, who started to come out onto the field. The ref was immediately drawn to them and kept hold of the quaffle, not letting Mullet take the penalty. The leprechauns took offense and swarmed the Vila angrily. The Vila shifted into their more bird-like form and started throwing fireballs. Harry's eyes widened behind his omnioculars at the visage on the Vila's faces. Officials rushed out to get between the mascots and force them aside. Mustafa landed and started yelling at the Vila, which caused one to fling a fireball at him. He ducked it but sent the Vila from the field for it. The Bulgarian supports yelled in uproar. Mustafa flew up and gave Mullet the quaffle to shoot his penalty and followed it by awarding another penalty to the Irish. Play resumed with the Bulgarians taking the quaffle down the pitch. They were able to manage a strike against the Irish, bringing the score to 160-10. In the process, Crum was hit with a bludger to the face. "Oh, Crum's hit." Bagman's voice rang out. Harry zoomed in on Crum, whose nose was gushing blood. The young seeker shook his head to clear it and wiped the blood from his eyes before they narrowed and accelerated on his broom. "He's seen it," Harry yelled, which for him was a bit more than a whisper. All his friends heard him though, and as one all their heads swiveled towards Crum, making the adults behind them snicker. Crum dived down and zagged to the left, leaving Lynch in the dust. He reached his hand out and snagged the snitch. Crum's caught the snitch. He saves Bulgaria from a complete failure. The Irish win. The Irish win. Bagman shouted, and those in the minister's box hid a wince at the look the Bulgarian minister was giving the large man dressed like a bee. Ludo. Fudge reprimanded him, and Ludo did not seem the least bit fazed. A flurry of activity burst out in the box. The World Cup of Quidditch trophy was brought in and the box expanded a bit. Photographers flooded in. And your runner-ups, the Bulgarians. The Bulgarian players streamed into the booth looking resolute. They stopped to shake hands with first their minister and then Minister Fudge and Ludo Bagman. "There he is," Isabel hissed excitedly. Crum walked in with blood still all over his face and robes. It looked like someone had said it, but Crum had not waited around for them to do anything about the blood. Crum up close looked like a bird of prey with his hooked nose and lanky build with long arms. He walked somewhat hunched over and looked as if he would rather be on his broom again. "And your winners, the Irish national team." Ludo's voice rang across the stadium, followed by chants of Ireland. The Irish players burst into the box. Led by the chasers for the Irish, and then Lynch, the captain and seeker, was brought it, supported by his beaters and followed by the Irish keeper. Lynch was smiling stupidly as he took the cup when it was offered to him by Ludo, who refused to give it up to Fudge. He nearly fell over giving it a key, before passing it on to his teammates. As the team was given the trophy, the noise reached unbearably loud levels as reporters called out questions at rapid fire. Aurora got the attention of the teens and nodded to the exit. The large group vacated the box without being missed, which was fine by both Harry and Sirius. The group made their way out of the stands and to their campsite. The teens chattered on and on about the game with input from Sirius, Ted, and Tonks at times. Izzy was a spastic mess and dragged Wayne along for the ride. Wayne was crowing about the Irish beaters. Harry and Tonks struck up a conversation about Crum and pulled Susan and Neville into a debate on why he chose to catch the snitch when he did. The walk back had them jostled and smushed between the crowd, but they made it back rather intact. "Andy, Ted, are you sure you don't want to stay? There's plenty of room," Sirius asked once they got back to their tents. "No, but thank you," Andromeda said with a shake of her head. "I need to prep some documents still, and Ted volunteered to work an early shift at the hospital tomorrow." "I figured I'd give some of the younger ones a break," Ted said with a laugh. "Hungover healers aren't the best." The adults chuckled. "And I have to get back to the Auror tent," Tonks said. "I'll walk to the entrance with you." The three Tonks family members waved goodbye as the others started a fire in the pit in the middle of their campsite. "All right, who wants s'mores?" Aurora asked as Creature walked out of the tent and handed her with a bag of marshmallows, graham crackers, and Honeydukes chocolate. "S'mores?" Susan asked. It was echoed by most of those around the campfire. Aurora shared a look with Wayne. Aurora tossed the bag to Wayne. "Show these poor deprived wizards." Wayne caught it, laughing. Harry woke with a start, his knife in his hand. He felt someone watching him. He blinked a few times to clear his eyes to see Creature staring at him. "Creature?" Harry asked immediately, noticing Creature seemed ill at ease. "Master Harry, I cannot blink," Creature said just as the sound of an explosion seemed to go off. Harry was up out of bed and slipped into his shoes, strapping his wand on his arm. "Wake the others, quick," Harry murmured as he went to Wayne and Neville's beds. He could start to hear screaming coming from outside the tent walls. Neville was stirring, but Wayne was still out. "Nev," Harry spoke as loud as he could. Neville pushed himself up and saw Harry alert and moving to Wayne. Harry's wand was out. Neville quickly sat up. "Wayne, get up," Neville shouted as Harry tried to wake him. "Huh." Wayne nearly fell out of bed. Neville, shoes not slippers, Harry said, moving to shove shoes in Wayne's face. Wayne blearily took them and slipped them on, not bothering to ask, simply trusting Harry. The boys were out the door to their room and into the living quarters. "What's going on?" Aurora shouted as Sirius came flying into the tent looking grim. "Death Eaters," Sirius hissed. "We need to get them out of here." He shot a look at the teens. "Creature," Sirius went to say but was cut off by Harry. "They have wards up." Creature said he couldn't blink, Harry said urgently. The others looked at him funny, but more screaming was heard. "You're sure?" Aurora asked him. He nodded. Aurora, Sirius, and Remus shared looks before Aurora nodded. The tent opened before anything else could be said. Everyone turned with their wands out. "Hold," Gregor called in his booming voice. They lowered their wands as the members of the McDougal clan barreled in. "There's wards up," Gregor said. "Aye," Sirius said before turning to the teens that were with his party. "You all are going straight out of here and running for woods." They looked ready to argue, but Sirius cut them off, surprisingly serious for once. "No arguing. Get to the woods and out of the wards and have Creature, Ox and Iona will apparate you out. Go." He held the tent open for the teens to move through. Harry turned to Creature and bent down, turning. "Climb on, Creature." Creature looked at Harry with surprise but quickly acquiesced. He climbed on for the piggyback ride. Harry stepped out of the tent and into chaos. Flames were roaring in the not-so-distance, people were rushing here and there, screaming in all manner of languages, and above it all was the flashes of spells. Harry glanced in the direction of the most noise. The spells were flinging from a horde of individuals in black robes and masks. The bone white and silver used on some of the masks glinted in the moonlight. In the air, being levitated, twisting and writhing, were people, one of whom he recognized from Gate, the Muggle. "Go," Sirius shouted at them. The teens plus Lennox and Iona took off into the chaos while the others shared a glance before heading off in the opposite direction toward attackers. Harry took off with the others with a final glance back at his mum and Sirius. Wayne, Ox and Neville were able to keep their path mostly clear as they ran through the crowd. "Ow!" Izzy gave a pained shout and stumbled, but her mother grabbed her arm and kept her steady while Creature snapped his fingers from around Harry's neck, and around them people were sent flying back a few feet. "Nice one," Harry muttered between breaths. He dodged around toppled tents and cookware while dancing around some still-lit fires, all the while keeping them to the back of the pack. Creature doing a fine job of keeping the crowd from engulfing them from behind. Harry dashed into the trees. Some others had slowed, thinking the trees meant safety. "Wards still up," Creature said to Harry. "Further," Harry shouted as much as he could up to Ox, who had started to slow. A fire flared up in the trees to the right of them, causing those to have stopped to panic once more. The oddity of 5 teens, 1 wizard and witch, and a house elf finally came to stop about 20 yards into the woods. "Wards down," Creature called as they came into a clearing. Harry let Creature jump off his back as they all caught their breath. Iona looked the troop over. "Isabel, let me see your face." She called her daughter over. Ox came near with his wand lit, giving them some light. "Episki," Iona said, flicking her wand at her daughter's cheek where a bruise had started to form. Izzy flinched but then breathed out an easy, "Thanks, Mum. I think we should all go to the keep and wait for the others there," Iona said, looking over the teens. They nodded. "Ox, take Neville. Is you and Sue are with me? Creature, can you bring Harry and Wayne?" Iona asked the little elf who was sticking next to Harry. "Yes, mistress," Creature said with a bow. Ox held his arm out to Neville. "Take a breath." He grinned at the slightly greenish tint Neville's face took on as the teen did. A loud crack was heard and the two disappeared from the clearing. Iona followed with the girls while Creature took one of Harry and Wayne's hands and popped out of the woods. Harry, Wayne, and Creature appeared in the entry hall of the McDougal keep next to the others. Iona breathed out a long breath before looking everyone over in their various states of dress. "Why don't we all change, and then we'll wait in the living room? Creature, would you pop into the kitchen and ask Millie to start some tea?" Creature bowed his head and popped out of the hall. They filed out of the hall with Ox directing the boys to his and his brother's rooms to get them clothes to wear, as Neville was in boxers and a t-shirt, whereas Wayne and Harry were only in boxers. "Harry, you might want to brush your hair," Ox said with snicker as Harry pulled on t-shirt and flannel pajama bottoms. Wayne joined him in laughing as he finished pulling a t-shirt down over his head and walked into Ox's room. "Ya look like ya stuck your finger in a socket," Wayne quipped. Neville laughed. "I'm not entirely sure what that means, but I'm sure it's accurate." Harry flicked him off but did look in Ox's mirror. He grabbed Ox's brush and ran it through his hair, making it marginally better. He shrugged as Ox laughed more and ushered them downstairs. The girls and Iona were sipping tea. Susan and Isabel were curled next to each other on one of the couches. Harry took the other seat on the couch, leaving Susan between him and Isabel. Susan moved around so she was leaning against Harry's side and had her legs in Isabel's lap. Wayne, Neville, and Ox took another couch, smirking at the Harry. Harry missed it as Creature gave him some tea. "Thanks, Creature," Harry muttered. Creature bowed and disappeared with a pop. That was the only noise in the room for some time as they sipped their tea and waited. Ox started pacing after nearly 10 minutes had passed. Iona's eyes traveled from her 2 children to the other teens in the room and back again. She quirked a smile as she noticed Isabel asleep with her head on Susan's lap and Susan's eyes nearly closing as she laid her head on Harry's shoulder. Finally, they heard pops of apparition cracks from the entrance hall, was followed by rushing footsteps. Iona stood and hurried to meet them to let them know they had all made it back to the keep safely. Gregor breathed a sigh of relief on seeing her. Iona came over to him and touched his cheek where a bruise was starting to form. She looked over the others and saw Aurora and Remus seemed fine though exhausted. Sirius was sporting a split lip and her older boys were in various states of disarray but no other injuries. "Come on, they're all waiting in the sitting room." Iona led the group to said room. The teens had all sat up upon hearing the sounds of arrival. Isabel launched herself at her dad and brothers. Harry's eyes went straight to Aurora and roved her form looking for injuries. She shook her head and gave him a reassuring look before rolling her eyes in Sirius's direction. "The old dog apparently thinks I can't fight and ended up with that." She finished with a laugh at Sirius's put-out look. "Well, excuse me for trying to be chivalrous," Sirius exclaimed in an exaggerated voice, effectively breaking the tension. Small laughs were heard from the group. What happened? It was Isabel that asked the question that was on everyone's minds. "Death Eaters," Sirius said with a sneer. "Those were his followers, weren't they?" Susan half-asked, half-stated. Harry went stiff next her. Aurora and Remus's eyes watched him closely for any other sign of disturbance. His eyes seemed to almost glow with anger. Remus shared a questioning look at Aurora, who shook her head minutely. Sirius was drawn to Harry's eyes as well, as the glow seemed to get a bit brighter when Gregor answered. "Yes, they started the riot. They were moving through the English campsite. When we got to them, though, there could not have been more than 10 or so garbed Death Eaters. The rest were sympathizers and drunks," Sirius spat out. "They joined in and turned it into a full-blown riot. The Death Eaters were the ones torturing the Muggles." "Sirius, they shouldn't hear this," Iona said sharply. "They need to know, hun," Gregor said, putting his arm around her. He glanced at Harry and she followed his gaze and nodded at Sirius. "The others were the ones starting fires and causing most of the chaos," Sirius said with a shake of his head. "Why would they join the Death Eaters?" Isabel asked with a disgusted look on her face. It was Remus that answered, "You know, who only had a limited number of Death Eaters. Most of his army was made up of sympathizers that he did not fully trust or include in the vilest of his plans. He also had the allegiance of a variety of dark creatures. He only marked, masked, and kept in close contact with his Death Eaters." "You really shouldn't have quit," Aurora groaned as the teens looked transfixed on Remus's lecture. Remus grinned despite the seriousness of his topic. "Do we need to be worried?" It was Ox that asked. Remus shook his head. "I do not believe so. Somebody fired the dark mark into the sky." He paused when he heard the sharp intake of breaths, but the teens and the younger McDougal boys looked confused at that. "They used to leave the dark mark in the sky when overhead of when they killed someone," Aurora cut in a subdued voice. All the older people in the room took a pause as they looked to be stuck in a memory. Remus shook himself out of it first and continued, "When the dark mark appeared in the sky, the first to flee were the Death Eaters. The others all froze, and officials were able to start rounding them up, but most people escaped in the chaos. We and some others who did not panic helped to put out fires and heal minor injuries. Silence followed Remus's explanation until Aurora asked Harry something that had been bothering her. Harry, what did you mean when you said creature could not blink? Yes, I was wondering that too, Remus asked. Harry shrugged. Blinking is what elves call their version of apparating. Wards. Sirius's voice took on a harsh tone. They tapped into the wards. He noticed confused looks. The Death Eaters. They changed the wards to prevent people from quickly leaving. It also explains how they disappeared so easily. They dropped the wards, but they were the only ones who knew. Everyone except Remus looked at Sirius with confusion, surprise, and amazement as he explained his thoughts. Sirius caught the looks and barked, I was a curse breaker before I got chucked into Azkaban. Remus chuckled. Real help there, Moony, Sirius groused to the laughs of the teens. Shite. Ox swore viciously. Lennox. Iona shot him a look. Ma, this means that one of the Death Eaters works for the Ministry. That's the only way they would have access to the ward stones of the stadium. There was a pause before nearly everyone spoke at once. Shite. Aurora shook her head before giving a dark laugh. Most of them probably worked for the Ministry. Harry's eyes flared again. Still, it's worrisome. Gregor spoke. The only good thing is they fled at the dark mark. They were scared about what it could mean. A clock struck 4 times from the corner of the sitting room. Aurora stretched her back out and sighed. Is it really 4 in the morning? Come on boys, we had better get home and let them know we're okay before my parents go spar. She looked to Neville. Do you want to come with us or flow home? Neville snorted. If I wake Gran up this early, she'll ban me from the greenhouses until I leave for school. Everyone grinned at Madame Longbottom's version of a punishment. She had certainly come a long way in her relationship with her grandson to know what to use to ground him. Sue, we saw your aunt before we left. Mr. McDougal spoke. She wants you stay with us for the next couple of days while they're sorting all this out. She'll flow us in the morn, later today. The teens said their goodbyes while Iona walked with Aurora, the boys, and Sirius and Remus. Aurora turned to her and gave her a hug. Thank you for keeping them safe. Sirius and Remus echoed her sentiments. Of course, with us Hufflepuffs you're already family. Iona grinned at them. Sirius and Remus apparated out while Aurora and Neville went through the flow first, followed by Harry and Wayne. Iona sighed and walked back to her husband and boys. Susan and Izzy hadn't moved, just fell asleep on the couch. Boys, take them to their room, that it's enough about Death Eaters right now. Ready to go? Dawn asked as Harry came into the entry hall with his trunk trailing behind him. Harry just nodded as he leaned against a wall. He had been in pensive mood since the World Cup, not that she blamed him. The Ministry still had no suspects on the Death Eaters that were present or whomever it was that cast the dark mark in the sky. Dawn was rather irritated at the Ministry's inaction herself. Madame Bones had visited just last night with Susan. She had requested to talk to Cyril after dinner. Apparently Minister Fudge was interfering with her investigation. He had shut down their access to the site of the World Cup, citing the riot as nothing more than rowdy Irishmen and a prank. She and Cyril were trying to get a voting bloc together to allow the Auror's re-entry to the site. Come here. She pulled him to her side. Right now, there's nothing we can do. Cyril and Madame Bones are doing all they're able. She paused and waited until he nodded. That being said, none of this feels right. He nodded again. Keep on your guard and watch that little shite Malfoy. Cyril told me his father was one of those who pled mind control or whatever the hell wizards call it. But remember to try and enjoy yourself. These other schools should take most of the focus this year, all right? He nodded, but she gave him a look. Yes ma'am, he said aloud with a quirked smile. Ready to go, Harry, Cyril said, stepping into the entry hall as Dawn released Harry from a hug. Apparated or flow? He asked and then laughed at Harry's look of discontent. Apparate, Harry finally said with a sigh of reluctance. Harry grabbed his trunk with one hand as Cyril took his other arm, and with a crack they disappeared. I'll never get used to that, Dawn said with a shake of her head. Harry and Cyril appeared on platform 9 3/4 with a crack that was lost in the din of the platform. It was bustling despite the two getting there early as they usually do. Harry looked around with surprise and shared a glance with Cyril. Cyril's raised eyebrow was the only tell of his surprise. I guess they really want to find out what this year's surprise is. Harry gave a snort and shook his head. Harry. Izzy's voice rang out over the crowd, causing Harry to laugh silently and Cyril to chuckle quietly. She's got a damn big mouth for such a tiny person. Harry turned to see Wayne standing there with a grin. Harry grinned back and gave Wayne a fist bump. Izzy and Susan came up, their trunks rolling behind them. Izzy cocked back her arm and hit Wayne in the stomach. Oof. What the hell? Wayne exclaimed. That was for whatever it was you said. Izzy grinned and gave Harry a hug, which Harry was finally starting to return after years. You did probably deserve that for something, Susan said, grinning and Wayne a one-armed hug before blushing slightly when doing the same to Harry. Well yeah, but if don't know it shouldn't count, Wayne said, his grin back in place. Cyril stood there trying to contain his laughter. Isabel dear, did you have to hit the boy? Iona said, coming up behind the girls. Cyril, lovely to see you again. You as well. Should we let this rabble on the train? Cyril asked and all 4 teens gave him a mock-offended look. Not waiting for Neville? Iona asked. The 4 snickered. Cyril grinned. Much to Madame Augusta's chagrin, he'll roll in just before departure. I did not realize that was every year tradition. Iona said, laughing. All right, you 4 behave and good luck. Write to any of us if you need something. Iona said, pulling Izzy into a bear hug and giving the other 3 a slightly less powerful hug. Girls, make sure they behave somewhat, Cyril said, giving Izzy a quick hug, and then Susan. To Susan he whispered, try to keep them from landing Dumbledore in St. Mungo's. Susan gave him a grin and nodded. Both Wayne and Harry looked Cyril suspiciously. He just grinned, giving Wayne a handshake, which he followed by giving Harry a hug. Be safe and watch your back, Cyril said so only Harry could hear. Harry nodded when he pulled back. The 4 took their trunks and made their way onto the train. They took the last seat on the last car as always. Harry and Wayne loaded the trunks up onto the luggage rack and flopped back down onto the bench seat across from the girls. Izzy and Susan rolled their eyes at the 2. Oh wonderful, Izzy said, making a disgusted sigh as she looked out the window. Wah, Wayne said and glanced out. He scowled. Bollocks. He turned to Harry. Poofter Goldilocks is back for another. Was it much to ask for his Nancy boy daddy to have a tutor kill him? Harry and Izzy started laughing while Susan just looked annoyed out the window. We did just see the tosser. Neville's voice rang in the compartment as he came in and threw his trunk up top. There was still time. Izzy was the one to speak as she gave Neville a hug, as did Susan. Harry just gave him a fist bump while Wayne clapped him on the back and nearly knocked him over in the process. Oi, Neville said, stumbling forward a bit. Wayne looked a tad sheepish. Another growth spurt. Neville just shook his head and sat next to Harry. You know the little tosser's going to come grace us with his presence, Susan said, shaking her head in an annoyed manner. Ya think they'd care if we shoved him out the back? Harry asked, nodding to the back door. Harry, Susan said in a warning tone. You're not allowed to get arrested for killing Malfoy. Harry and Wayne shot her pouting looks. He's not worth save it for someone else. She finished with a grin. Harry, Izzy, and Wayne started chuckling while Neville just shook his head. Heard anything more on the tournament? Neville asked them all after the snickering passed. Just some basic stuff, Isabel answered with shrug. Ox is trying to keep the vow of secrecy that Bagman wants, but apparently Bagman has trouble keeping his own mouth shut. That got a laugh from Susan, who had heard more than one snappish comment about the former beater from her aunt. There's supposed to be 4 tasks that placed throughout the year, but he won't tell us what they are. The only other thing he mentioned about the tasks was they're supposed to represent the elements. It's gonna be right boring, for the other kids, ain't it? Wayne said as more of a statement, if that's all it is. Susan nodded. I can't imagine the students from Beauxbatons will be too pleased to spend the winter months in Scotland. Harry gave her a weird look. It's in the south of France, it doesn't get nearly as cold. Harry nodded. Just then the door to their compart flew open, revealing Fred and George plus one other passenger. The 4th years burst out laughing. Allie was currently sitting atop George's, or was that Fred's, head. George shot Harry a droll look. Your cat's a menace sometimes. Fred lost his battle with holding in laughter as Allie jumped straight into Harry's lap using George as a springboard. Allie rubbed against Harry and then purred as Harry started to scratch under his chin. "Is there a reason the damn cat pulled George by the hair to get us here?" Fred finished, still snickering. "Yeah," Harry nodded, smirking. "Finished yesterday. You ready for your part?" "We're always ready," George said, his annoyance fading away at the mere mention of a prank. "By the way, you did see who's back?" Fred added, his grin fading to a sneer, as the twins moved into the compartment and shut the door, putting a noise-canceling charm on it. "Yeah, the little blonde tosspot," Wayne replied. "Any thoughts? We have some products we've been working on, and would love to test 'em out," George spoke as Izzy interrupted. "Oi, quit doing that, I'm gonna throw up. While we plan a warm welcoming," Fred finished the twins' speech with a grin at the younger girl. "Ass biscuit," Izzy muttered. Wayne snickered, causing Izzy to kick him in the shin. "Bloody hell," Wayne said, rubbing his shin as the others laughed. "Violent bird," he said under his breath so that only Harry and Neville could hear. "Anyways," Neville said, getting them back to Malfoy. "I think I speak for all us, commence the pranking," Neville said, getting laughs and nods from the others. "We'll meet Saturday. Plan a nice welcome back gift," Wayne said, looking to Harry, who nodded, and then to the twins. "Roger that. Now if you'll excuse us, we have 3 chaser," George said. "To find and annoy," Fred finished, giving them all a wave. The fourth years chuckled as the twins made their way off as the train started moving. Neville pulled out a book that read, "Herbs from Remote Locations." Harry chuckled at the title. Neville caught it and shrugged. He's not the most creative, but the wizard travels. He pointed at the names scrawled beneath the title. Izzy and Susan started chatting about the summer assignment from arithmancy. Izzy pulled out her notebook as Susan pointed out a cheat to her. Harry and Wayne grinned at each other. "Nerds," Wayne coughed. Izzy, quick as a whip, kicked him in the shin. "Oi, damn it, woman." He jumped again as another kick was aimed for him. Neville laughed. "Quit while you can, mate." Wayne growled a bit. "Fine, want to play some chess?" he asked. Harry nodded. Harry pulled out the traveling chess set he had. Allie moved to sit on his shoulder with his tail draped over Harry's other shoulder. Harry set up the pieces and spelled the board to float in between the two boys. Harry moved his pawn first, starting the game. The two boys were evenly matched when it came to chess, making the game interesting. Wayne's style was much like he is in person, bold and up front. Harry, under both his mum's and grandfather's tutelage, was becoming more strategic when it came to his chess play, though he could not match Susan and Izzy's levels. And the gods help him if he played against the twins or their younger brother Ron. The 4 Hufflepuffs discovered over break what Neville had already known: Ron Weasley was a damn chess prodigy. The game continued as the train moved, with neither boy gaining much of an edge. Susan looked over her book, seeing Harry about to miss a move, and nudged him with her foot as he picked up a rook. She checked to see if Wayne was watching, but the boy was focused on the board. She shook her head and Harry placed his rook back down and looked again at the board. Harry tilted his head much like Allie does as he looked at the board. Both cat and boy making the same look had Wayne cracking up until Harry picked up his bishop and moved it. "Check," Harry said with a grin. Wayne's face fell. "Wah, bugger," Wayne swore under his breath. Allie tensed on Harry's shoulder and let out a hiss right after Wayne's statement. The 5 teens turned in the direction of the door, and sure enough, a platinum blonde head appeared with 2 hulking masses next to it. Neville looked out the window. "Well, it's about that time." He shook his head. "Halfway." The door flew open courtesy of one of the hulking masses. Before Malfoy could even open his mouth, Wayne cut him off. "Look who it is, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and Daddy's little baby angel." He tittered the last part in a high-pitched tone and fluttered his eyes. His friends turned to him and snickered at. Malfoy's face twisted in anger. Crabbe and Goyle stalked forward. Immediately the 3 boys were hit with a multitude of colored spells. Malfoy's mouth turned into a zipper that zipped shut with a snap. Crabbe sprouted daisies from his stubby head and his feet turned into a pair of pink swimming fins. He finished his step forward, tripping on the fins and falling headfirst into the train cab, where Allie pounced on the boy. Goyles let out a muffled groan as his 2 front teeth started to grow out of control at a rapid rate. At the same time a pair of oversized red and gold clown sunglasses appeared stuck to his face. A big red nose appeared, and his hair turned to the color of the rainbow. Another flick of a wand had the three boys went flying back out of the cab while Allie jumped to Harry. Susan flicked her wand and the door slammed shut as laughter rang throughout the entire train car as the three Slytherins fled. Bugger, Wayne muttered, and all four of his friends turned to look at the entrance to Hogwarts. Headmistress McGonagall was staring at the not-so-horseless carriages trundling the upper years to the doors of the castle. She narrowed in on the five of them in no time. "That's not a good look," Izzy replied. "Just look sad until we get to her office," Harry said with a downcast expression. "But he's a prick," Izzy shot back. Shut up and look guilty," Susan hissed. "You five come with me." Headmistress McGonagall stared them down as they got out of the carriage. Neville, despite his confidence boost since meetings, his friends did not need to try to appear to sweat, it was already pouring off him. They saw Malfoy and his goons nearby pointing with some other Slytherins while looking smug. The group trudged past with the headmistress going first. Eek! A loud screech was heard, followed by maniacal laughter. Everyone turned to see Peeves pelting the group of Slytherins with water balloons. "Peeves!" the headmistress yelled out, and the poltergeist sped off laughing all the while. The five friends quickly schooled their features as the headmistress continued, though Harry noticed a slight twitch on his aunt's face. He grinned to himself as the gargoyle guarding the entrance to the headmistress's office moved aside, allowing the stairs to appear. The headmistress's shoes sound on the stairs was the only noise as they followed her up. They stopped in front of her desk while she went around and took a seat. "You could not have waited for him to do something first," she said at last, and the five let out relieved breaths. "Technically we did," Wayne drawled. "We waited till Tweedle. Crabbe started in the cab." The others, even Neville, snickered at his slip-up. The headmistress cast her eyes to the sky as if to pray, "Merlin, help me. You realize the only reason you're not losing points is because technically term hasn't started." The four Hufflepuffs looked relieved at that, but Neville just shrugged. "All of five of you will have detention with Hagrid Friday night. He needs to gather ingredients for Professor Slughorn in the forest. On a Friday." Izzy's whine slipped out before she could stop it. She quickly grimaced and looked down at the headmistress's look. A throat clearing turned everyone to a picture of an old headmaster. "Pardon me, headmistress, but it seems the Reavers have struck again." "Ow man, we missed," Wayne whined, getting a look from the headmistress. "What, they're good pranks," he said, not looking the least bit abashed. "What did they do?" she asked. "The Sorting Hat challenged Professor Flitwick to a rap battle," the portrait said. The five teens snickered. "Go off with you." Headmistress McGonagall shooed them out the door of her office. To the Great Hall. The teens moved, though Wayne was still looking at her. Harry bumped him. "There's a passage from here to the Great Hall." Harry took hold of his robe and dragged him down the stairs. They moved down the corridors to the Great Hall with little to no shame at their punishment. "I really wanted to see this one play out," Izzy muttered. "At least it'll throw them off us even more," Neville replied as they neared the doors to the hall. They opened and laughter was still dying out around the tables as the headmistress took her seat. The newbies started getting called to the disgruntled Sorting Hat as Neville bid the four Hufflepuffs a goodbye and strolled to the Gryffindor table. He took a seat next to the Weasley twins. "About time," Oliver said with a grin. "You missed a good one." "What happened?" The four took their seats with Izzy answering, "We have detention on Friday night." "For Malfoy and his goons?" Roger asked with a grin. They nodded. "Worth it?" The four nodded again and then clapped as Hufflepuff got a new student. "Lose any points?" The question came from Cedric, who was smiling widely at the four. "Nope," she said. "Term hadn't started yet, so," Susan said with a shrug. "Nice," one of Cedric's friends said, laughing and then clapping as another student was added to Hufflepuff. The sorting continued with Hufflepuff gaining 6 new members, the smallest of the 4 houses this year. Ravenclaw added the most students this time around, surprising some but pleasing Professor Flitwick. The small man was smiling widely at his table. Typically, Gryffindor received the most students. It was then that Harry noticed the head table. It had been expanded and some new additions were added to the mix of professors. All of them familiar to him. Sitting next to Hagrid in a magenta robe and tall pointed wizard's hat was the bearded visage of Albus Dumbledore. Harry's eyes caught the old man's and hardened into green emeralds. Dumbledore shifted uncomfortably before Harry moved his eyes to the next person. In bright yellow robes looking like he already had too much wine served at the head table was Ludo Bagman. Next to Bagman was Ox, who was still chuckling to himself over the prank at the start of the feast. The last face was scarred and a whirring fake eye. Harry recognized the man from countless stories and seeing him with Tonks. Headmistress McGonagall came to the front of the head table from where she was arguing with a disgruntled Sorting Hat. She had an unamused look on her face. As always, the Reavers when caught will face strict punishment. She said as if fighting the urge to sigh. Giggles were heard throughout the hall that were quickly silenced at a glare. Before I lose you all to food, there are some announcements to be made. First, I like to welcome our new defense against the dark arts professor Alistair Moody. The man stood with a slight hitch and nodded, both his eyes scanning the room, the fake one never stopping. Did you know, Matt, I was going to be teaching? Izzy turned to Susan and Harry. She was not alone. Many of the Hufflepuffs turned to look at the two. No, Auntie didn't mention it, Susan replied, shaking her head. Neither did Tonks, Harry said quietly. Not sure why he'd want to, he hates kids, Harry added, and those listening groaned. The attention was taken back to the headmistress as the clapping died down. Are we ever going to have a normal year of defense? Cedric sighed. You mean it's not just us? Wayne remarked. Nope, it's been years, another of Cedric's friends replied. As you have noticed, we have some other guests with us this feast. She gestured to the others at the table. This year Hogwarts has the illustrious honor of hosting an event that has not been held in some time. She paused, and Harry thought she was doing a rather admirable job of hiding her true dislike, the Triwizard Tournament. As she finished, a hum of noise broke out. Some of the students looked impressed while others simply looked confused. For those of you who do not know, the Triwizard Tournament is an ancient competition between the three apex wizarding schools of Europe. Hogwarts, a cheer was heard, making the headmistress smile. Beauxbaton Academy of Magic and Durmstrang Institute of Magic. The tournament has been revived by the Ministries of Magic and will take place over the course of the year. At the beginning of October, Hogwarts will host a delegation from each school for the rest of the year to compete. One student from each school shall be chosen to represent their school and country on the world stage. The winner of this tournament goes down in the annals of wizarding history. The headmistress finished, though Harry picked up a hint of disgust that most did not. He noticed some of the other professors seemed to share that distaste, while some, like Slughorn, looked pleased. To speak more on the tournament is the Director for International Affairs, Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked slightly surprised at the headmistress, but Harry caught the subtle nod in Bagman's direction as he knocked back another goblet. Dumbledore stood to some applause that turned to laughs as Bagman slapped him on the back and Dumbledore rocked forward a bit. Thank you, Headmistress McGonagall. Dumbledore gave a slight bow to her. If he held any resentments, no one could tell. The Ministry is pleased to give you the opportunity to interact with wizards from around our world while also displaying the brilliance of our very own Hogwarts. There were some cheers from the students at the last part. The two other magical academies will be arriving on October 30th and will be bringing with them a delegation to represent their schools. On the 31st, a feast will be held to open the tournament, and an impartial judge will deem a wizard or witch from each school worthy to represent them as champion. The winner of this tournament not only wins victory for their school and country but earns eternal glory as well as 1,000 galleons. Another cheer that was louder but interspersed with whispers about the judge was heard in the prize. Dumbledore paused, waiting for the cheering and whispers to die out before continuing. He appeared much more serious as he started to speak next, the twinkle in his eyes even dimming. This tournament is not for the faint of heart. His voice held a power to it that Harry and only a few others seemed to feel. The challenges the champions will face are designed to test and tax all of your magical abilities to prove yourself. In the past, this has resulted in injury and even death, that dampened some enthusiasm. As such, the Ministry has seen fit to impose an age limit. Boos and jeers were heard throughout the hall. Headmistress McGonagall stood and set off a spell that boomed throughout the hall and glared at her students, saying one word: enough. The hall quieted almost immediately. Dumbledore looked impressed and a tad bit surprised. Harry snickered in his seat at that. Dumbledore nodded in thanks. Only those who will reach adulthood by the 31st will be allowed to compete. He finished, gave a slight bow to the headmistress and retook his seat. The headmistress stood again, her expression stern. I expect all of you to represent Hogwarts at its best. She paused to look at all 4 tables before her face softened. Now, eat up. The food appeared on the tables and students broke out into chatter. Cedric, you go and ta enter. Wayne asked as the 6th year came into the common room. Harry and he were waiting for the girls to come in before heading to the hall for breakfast and receive their upcoming schedules. Harry looked at Cedric with interest, as did those around the common room. Cedric grinned. Well, we can't win Quidditch this year, so we might as well win an international tournament. The common room cheered, especially the Quidditch team members. Harry managed his own loud cheer, which Cedric nodded to, fully aware that it was still hard for Harry to make that much noise. Oh, and Jer said he would enter. That got a few cheers but not much. Jeremy, Cedric's fellow year mate, was nowhere near as popular with others in the house. Hey, don't leave me out, Manoj Pandit added as the 7th year. Manoj, a 7th year, popular with the younger years that he mentored, received louder cheers, including one from Susan and Isabel, who just joined the common room with some other girls. Congrats, Cedric. Izzy only spoke to Cedric out of the 3, making most of the common room snicker at the other 2. Isabel did not like Jeremy, which was common knowledge in the house. Manoj pouted and she cracked a grin at him, making the others laugh and Jeremy roll his eyes. All right, all of us need to get to breakfast and get our schedules, Cedric called to those that were left. Yeah, Wayne said as he and Harry got up and made their way to the door. Some of Hufflepuff were already at the Great Hall, which was typical. Also typical was the presence of all of Ravenclaw, with Professor Flitwick handing out schedules. Slytherin was nearly all there, while Gryffindor was about only a third full, but everyone present was talking about the tournament announcement. Harry was happy to see the extra chairs were no longer present in the hall as he took his seat. Who else do you think will enter? Izzy asked as they sat. I don't give a damn who it is as long as it bloody well ain't me, Harry muttered. The 4th years around him started cracking up laughing. Don't worry, Harry, we'll keep you far away from the judge on Halloween, Professor Sprout said from behind them. This caused another round of laughter from Puffs near the group, while Harry shrugged at her. Schedules, dearies. She handed them over to the 4th years before moving on to the 5th years. What's up first? Wayne said without looking up from his breakfast. We've got care first up, Harry said. And we've got arithmancy, Susan said with a grimace. Izzy groaned. That means we have to go back and get that damn book. It was shared by the 2 others around them in the subject. Harry smirked while Wayne openly snickered. Izzy aimed a kick at his shin, only she was the one that yelped in pain. What the hell? Harry started laughing as Wayne grinned charmingly. Spelled my shins. Izzy looked ready to jump him, but Susan stood and placed a hand on her shoulder, holding her in place, causing both boys to let out loud laughs. And then ancient runes, lunch, and closing with a double herbology, Susan said as finishing the day off. Double herbology, that doesn't sound promising. Last time we had a double it was those mandrakes, Harry said with grimace, remembering the bothersome humanistic plants. Susan nodded with an equally put-off look. Come on, Iz, we need to go get our books. Susan pulled Izzy up from where she was alternating eating and still glaring at Wayne. Wayne winked at her and Harry elbowed him. Ya know she's gonna get you back. Ah, that's half the fun. Wayne grinned, causing Oliver and Roger to laugh. Let's get to care. I wanna see what Hagrid's got for us. The 5 Hufflepuff 4th years that had care of magical creatures got up to make the trek down to Hagrid's. Lo there, Hagrid called to the group, who had been joined by Terry and Anthony from Ravenclaw. The Gryffindors filed down next, followed by the Slytherins. Harry rolled his eyes when he saw Draco direct a glare towards him. Wayne winked at the Slytherin, causing others to laugh. Draco looked to be going for his wand. Nuff o' that. Hagrid's booming voice rang out around the area for class by his hut today. Today we got an unearthing creature foe. Yeah. Hagrid gestured to some cages that held what seemed to hold jewels, with all the glinting of the sun reflecting on them. One tear, a group. Wayne went up and grabbed a cage for him, Neville, and Harry. He brought it back looking at it with wide eyes. He set it on their wood table and the other two boys shared his look. "That's a fire crab," Neville said looking it over. "Right you are," Hagrid said. 5 points ta Gryffindor. "I got a friend ta lend 'em ta me." "Which one of ya? Know where they're from?" Oliver raised his hand. "Fiji." "Right again. Now these are protected by many ministries. This jeweled shell being why." He gestured to the shell of the crustacean. It looked to be all jewels, but Harry noticed a thin line under the jewels, showing it was just encrusted in jewels still having a normal shell. "People like take their shells and use them for jewelry or potion cauldrons." "Potion cauldrons?" Wayne asked rather loudly while looking at the shell. "For desiccation. It doesn't actually do anything fair the potion." "Well that's fuck." Wayne stopped himself. "Stupid." Harry and Neville snickered next to him as Hagrid's face showed he knew what Wayne was about to say. Not that Hagrid seemed to mind. 5 points ta Hufflepuff. That made Harry and Neville snickers turn into a full-blown laugh, as did most of the class. "Now there are different kinds of fire crabs and ya can tell by shells. Some of them have ruby shells, sapphire or emerald." The class continued with little issue as Hagrid explained more about fire crabs and their defense mechanism, which include Draco pissing his crab off, getting his eyebrows singed off, much to the amusement of the class and Hagrid. The half-giant did his best to hide it, but Harry could tell he was still amused. They were dismissed without an assignment, so it was a rather nice way to start the year. Harry and Wayne parted from Neville as they went to head up to Ancient Runes while Neville left for divination. Harry and Wayne entered the Ancient Runes class with a few others from Care to find the other students in the class already present. Harry and Wayne took the seats saved for them next to Susan and Izzy. Harry gave a smile and nod to Daphne Greengrass, who returned it. "How was Care?" Susan asked as while she looked slightly haggard. "Cool, we worked with fire crabs," Harry replied. "Wicked shells on 'em," Wayne added with a grin. Izzy groaned. "Sometimes I really wish I would have taken that instead of arithmancy." Others in the classes seemed to share her opinion, causing those who did not take the hardest elective to snicker, including the professor. Harry just shrugged. "I'm sure Hagrid will have something terrifying at least 3 times this year." That caused the whole class to laugh loudly and Izzy to stop pouting and nod her agreement with a look of horror. And on that note, Professor Babbling stood. "Welcome back to another year. We'll be continuing with Elder Futhark runes and then starting into Younger Futhark runes and starting Anglo-Saxon Futhark runes." She handed out a rough schedule that they would follow for the year. "We'll start, as you can see, with some mainly just review of Elder Futhark runes. And since today some of you seem to already be stressed," she trailed off with a grin to which most of the class vigorously nodded, "we'll start with a simple review to get you back into the swing of runes. I want you all to pick something from the summer that you did and write about it in runes. You can use parchment and quill, but that means I want your best work." The class worked in relative silence with some talking here and there. Professor Babbling would correct some students and have them practice the rune on a separate sheet if she spotted a way to help. Most of the class wrote about the World Cup, but there were a few family trips that were written about. The class ended without an assignment, leaving Harry and Wayne grinning. "What are you grinning at?" Izzy said with narrowed eyes. 2 for 3 with no homework, Wayne gave a fist bump to Harry. Most of the class shot those in Care a dirty look, much to their collective amusement. They made their way down to the greenhouses accompanied by the Slytherins in the class. "Hello Daphne, I got to meet your mother last year," Harry said, holding his hand out for her to shake. Daphne gave Harry's hand a shake with a small smile. "She mentioned it. She also mentioned we would be spending Yule with you all, but that's on hold thanks to the tournament." Daphne had a quiet but steady voice. "These are Tracy Davis and Lilith Moon," she said, motioning to the girl on her left with light brown hair as Tracy, while Lilith had deep black hair that almost looked blue. "Nice to meet you all," Harry said with an easy grin which Tracy matched. Lilith nodded but still looked guarded. "You probably all know each other, but this is Susan, Isabel, and Wayne Hopkins." Susan and Isabel nodded and shared smiles with the other girls, having had met them before. Wayne though hadn't, and bowed with his arm outstretched. "Ladies." He grinned, which caused Susan and Isabel to roll their eyes. Lilith narrowed her eyes at him. but Tracy and Daphne just shook their heads and grinned at Susan and Isabel. "So, you are going to come to the Yule celebration?" Susan asked. "My father is Lord Sinistra's cousin, but we usually go to my mother's side." Daphne could not completely hide her annoyance. "Yeah, Nev's told us about Cormac," Harry mentioned. Izzy huffed out a breath and gave a shudder. "Gods, I'd probably curse that jackass if I had to have him at Yule." That got a laugh from all three Slytherins. "My uncle's just as bad," Daphne deadpanned. As they got closer to the greenhouses they could see others gathered. "Daff," Lilith spoke with an Irish accent. "Malfoy's there." The three Slytherin girls schooled their faces. "He'll bother you if y'all talk to me?" Harry asked with narrowed eyes. The Slytherin girls nodded. "Hold up guys," Harry said, and the three other Hufflepuffs got his look while the Slytherins tilted their heads at him. "We'll stay a few steps behind." He nodded that they should go forward. The girls with green piping on their robes nodded and gave him a small grin. They heard Wayne's voice. "The little ferret's really askin' for it." Harry, Iz, and Susan just nodded and then resumed their walk. They reached the other fourth-year puffs and snakes who had come from divination, and Harry noticed they were all looking at him again. Some of the Slytherins were smirking, including Malfoy, while Roger looked amused. Roger's look was shared by the other puffs, though one or two looked worried. Harry raised an eyebrow at his fellow students while Wayne asked, "What now?" "Trelawney predicted your death again," Roger said matter-of-factly, which turned into a grin and laugh at Harry's words. "Bloody F. Kin. Hell," he looked like he was about to continue, but Wayne elbowed him, cutting him off. Harry turned sharply, but Wayne just nodded to the see-through door as Professor Sprout opened it and ushered them in. "Right, welcome back," Mr. Red said as the younger teens entered the abandoned classroom that served as the Reaver's den. "To the pranking Hall of Wonders," Mr. Orange finished with a flourish and a bow. The younger teens laughed and bowed to the two older ones. "Whatcha ya working on?" Mr. Gray asked as Mr. Red stirred a potion. "Aging potion," Mr. Red replied with a grin. "Keep it away from me," Mr. Green said at the exact time Miss Purple said, "You think that'll work?" The twins laughed at the two vastly different expressions on the younger teens' faces. Mr. Green looked at the cauldron as if it was the devil incarnate, while Miss Purple was looking at the ingredients with interest. "It's one option," Mr. Orange said. "Until we know who the judge is. And how they plan to enforce it," Mr. Red finished. "And don't worry, we have no wish to piss off your mum," Mr. Orange said with a shiver, causing the others to laugh. "Okay, moving away from the tournament," Mr. Brown said as Mr. Green was still eyeing the potion with suspicion. "You said you had something for us." Mr. Green nodded and turned away from the potion as Mr. Red finished and wisely placed a protection charm around it. "I told Padfoot about losing the map last year and he thought that was tragic." Mr. Orange and Red hummed a funeral hymn. Mr. Green rolled his eyes. "He gave me this the day before yesterday." Mr. Green pulled out a large piece of blank parchment. He placed his wand to it. "The Marauders live on." Slowly familiar lines filled the pages, and the castle and its denizens came to fill the parchment. "Wicked," all the teens said in awe, especially when they saw the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets on it. "How did he add the chamber?" Miss White asked. "I don't know, he wouldn't tell me, which I'm pretty sure means Moony did it." That got laughter from the whole group. "Mischief managed still closes it. And he gave me a spell to use to wipe the map the headmistress has, permanently if I can get to it." "Nice." Mr. Gray gave Mr. Green a fist bump. "Do you know where she has it?" Mr. Brown asked. "No, not yet. All the bloody portraits make it hard to look for," Mr. Green said, shaking his head. "Might need to find a spell to help locate it." He mused and the twins nodded. "I found something for our resident ferret," Miss Purple said, grinning. She handed over a list of ingredients. "It'll turn him into a miniature troll." Mr. Red laughed. "Where did you find this?" "In the restricted section yesterday," Miss Purple said. "Slughorn's assignment," Mr. Green said. "Yep. Apparently it was made for life-like toys. They used muggles." Miss Purple made a grimace at her last words. "Is it permanent?" Miss White asked, her voice rising a bit. "No Slughorn will be able to reverse it, probably Madame Pomfrey too." "But muggles," Mr. Brown asked, picking up on Miss White's thoughts. It is from the 11th century and it was in the restricted section, Miss Purple stressed. The twins were eyeing Miss Purple. How did you get into the restricted section in 4th year potions? Mr. Orange finished. Slughorn lets advanced students have access to it. Miss Purple said with a shrug. I'm surprised you two aren't a part of his slug club. Mr. Green snorted. They'd have to show how smart they are for that. Mr. Orange and Mr. Red grinned and winked at that, causing the others to chuckle. We don't have to send away for ingredients this time, Mr. Red said, getting back to the potion. He was still holding the list. These are in the greenhouses and in the Forbidden Forest we'll get 'em. Mr. Orange finished. And I'll take the greenhouse ones, Mr. Brown said as he made a copy of the ingredients he would need to get. What about in the meantime? Miss White asked, surprising the others. What? She said, a bit annoyed. If he's making other Slytherins stay away from the other houses, the little prick deserves everything he gets. She huffed. Stupid rivalry. Padfoot gave me this, Mr. Green said, pulling out a potion that was electric blue in color. I'm almost afraid to ask, Miss Purple said, eyeing the potion as if it might bite, which was a definite possibility given who brewed it. Messrs. Red, Orange, and Gray laughed loudly while Mr. Green snickered. It's a little something cooked up by Mooney to silence my dad for a few days during owls, Mr. Green continued to snicker. Padfoot remembered it. All we have to do is slip it in his drink and the little pissant won't be able to speak for 3 days. I bet the Slytherins with brains will appreciate that. Miss White grinned. Best part is none of the professors figured out an antidote. Mr. Green grinned. I'll get it to Blitz. What about a welcoming prank? Mr. Gray asked, wiggling his eyebrows. I'm game, though if we do anything too bad Aunt Minnie will really start to try and find us and then turn us into tea cozies or something, Mr. Green said with a wince, and all the Reavers nodded. Good point, Miss Purple said. We'll work on ideas and if anyone thinks it's too far we nix it. Sounds good too, Mr. Red said. We don't fancy pissing our illustrious former head of house on a world stage, Mr. Orange finished. All right, see you guys later, Mr. Green said with a nod towards the potion. I'm getting far away from that. He turned on his heel only to stop at the door. Miss White called out, hold up, I'm coming with you. Harry turned with a grin and bowed her forward out the door. She grinned at him, and they left oblivious to the smirks of the others. You're really serious about avoiding this tournament? Susan commented as they started down the hall. Harry shrugged. Something shitty always seems to happen on Halloween. Susan's eyes widened a bit as she realized the truth of that statement. She shook her head. She trailed off, not sure what to say. Harry nodded and led them to the painting hiding the entrance to the kitchen. Is a good point, Susan finally said as the head elf came up to them. Hey Blitz, Harry's voice came out with more gravel than usual. Susan noticed. She attributed it to the tension running through him. She put her hand on his back and rubbed it in a soothing motion. Blitz grinned as he saw the tension bleed from the boy who did not seem to be aware of it. Hello Harry, Miss Bones. Blitz gave a bow. Susan grinned. Blitz, you can call me Sue, you know. Miss Sue. Blitz bowed again. He likes ya better. Harry chuckled and handed Blitz the potion. Mind putting this in the blonde Ponce's pumpkin juice? Blitz grinned as he held it up to the light. I remember this, gladly. The 2 4th years laughed as Blitz moved away snickering. Come on, I'll help you review for Transfiguration. Susan leading Harry out of the kitchens. Harry and his friends sat in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom and noticed, much to their pleasure, it hadn't changed much from last year with Professor Lupin. They did not expect much difference though with Moody teaching. The Hufflepuffs waited quietly, knowing far more about Moody's temperament from Sue than the more boisterous Gryffindors. The door slammed open behind them, causing the class to jump and turn. Susan, Harry, Wayne, Neville, Isabel, Oliver, and surprisingly Seamus Finnegan all turned with their wands out while the others just stared wide-eyed at their grizzled professor, still dressed in his trench coat and eye-whirling about. Good. 7 of you are only mostly dead. Moody followed by shouting at the others, constant vigilance. That's what keeps you alive against the dark arts. He intermittently shouted some words, causing the 4th years to jump. Fourth year you learn about curses, so put the books away. Many of the students smiled and a few cheered. Sue though did not look particularly thrilled. This is not going to end well, Sue muttered to Isabel, which caused Moody to grin manically. Isabel gulped. Bugger. Harry, Wayne, and Neville looked over from their three-seater desk and then to Moody, and their smiles died. Moody went to the board as he spoke. The chalk wrote on its own, "We'll start you off on the worst of the worst. The Unforgivables." The chalk wrote out unforgivable curses followed by the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Who can tell me about the unforgivable curses? The class was quiet, focused on Moody, but Hermione Granger raised her hand. Yes. Hermione Granger. She introduced herself first. There are 3, sir, all banned at separate times and are named unforgivable due to the intentions needed to cast them. Good, and they all end you in a one-way trip to Azkaban. Moody barked. They require, as Miss Granger said, intent to do harm and control. Now who can give me one? Moody nodded to Ron Weasley. You must be one of Arthur's boys. Ron for once felt pride when someone compared him to his family. Moody's way was a bit nicer, Harry thought as Ron straightened a bit. The Imperious Curse, my dad told me about it. It controls thoughts. Weasley's voice came out strong after starting somewhat hesitantly. Your dad would know all about that one. Gave the Ministry quite a bit of grief during the war. Why? Susan raised her hand and Moody nodded to her. Death Eaters pled the Imperious Curse, she spat out. Moody seemed somewhat taken aback but covered it quickly. The shared class of Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors all looked a bit fierce at her words, a marked difference from the Slytherins and Ravenclaws earlier in the week. Right. Scores of wizards and witches swore they only did the Dark Lord's bidding under the Imperious Curse. There is no way to test for the Imperious once it has been lifted. Moody said, and the chalk moved down under where Imperious was written and made room for more words. If cast correctly, the Imperious Curse has no tells. Someone who is learning the curse or does not have the willpower to control the individual does not have full control. The Imperious individual will appear in a dream-like state and their eyes may be unfocused. He then took out a scorpion that had been resting in a jar on his desk. Imperio. He cast the spell on the scorpion and then used his wand to direct the scorpion to hop from desk to desk, student to student, causing quite a few shrieks from students, and then a series of acrobatics Harry had never seen a spider do, leaving many of the students laughing. Moody, upon seeing the laughter, slammed his hand down on the desk, regaining their attention. You think that's funny, do you? What should I have it do next? He directed it above a container of water. Drown itself. The scorpion tried to resist the water and gave off screeches before Moody placed it back into its container. He looked at the students and saw his point was made, but followed with, wizards have cheerfully killed their whole families while under the curse. He paused and then added, the Imperious Curse can be resisted or thrown off entirely by someone of remarkable strong will or trained in O.C. Kluki. Now the next curse. Neville raised his hand. Mr. Longbottom? Moody questioned, recognizing the boy somewhat. Neville nodded. The Cruciatus Curse. His voice was taut with anger and his eyes had darkened almost to black. His look caused most of the Gryffindors and some Hufflepuffs to look at him with surprise while Moody looked appraising. Harry and Wayne took exception to the looks from their fellow fourth years with glares. Harry's eyes turned almost a glowing greening while Wayne had put his hand on Neville's shoulder and his other gripped his wand tight to the point where his knuckles were white. The Torture Curse, Moody said solemnly, regained the attention of the class, causing Harry and Wayne to lessen their looks, but Neville still remained on edge as he looked at the scorpion, having a good idea of what was coming next. The curse causes unimaginable pain throughout the whole body. The stronger the caster, the more hate the caster has, the more intense the pain. Moody's words seemed a bit far off and he shook his head, bringing himself to the present. The more discerning students noticed in wonder of the war. He levitated the scorpion out of the jar again. Crucio. The spell again with no color or wand movement hit the scorpion, and screeching of the likes the students had never heard came from the scorpion as it seemed to fold in on itself. Moody, upon seeing the looks on the students' faces, ended the spell. The scorpion continued to twitch in the air though as he placed it back into the container. The Torture Curse leaves no physical marks or wounds, yet can drive those under it quite mad. Neville's jaw twitched as he clenched his teeth. This time Harry put a hand on his shoulder and Neville calmed, though he looked at Harry with sympathy and Harry nodded. Both boys knew what the last curse was. The whole class by this point seemed to sense what was coming. The final curse. It was Oliver who answered, Oliver Rivers, Avada Kedavra. The killing curse. Oliver's jaw was clenched as well as he spoke. Susan was hit with a memory of being at a memorial with the Rivers in attendance. The killing curse, Moody nodded. There is no guard against, no spell to block it, and again no physical signs it has been cast apart from death. He levitated the scorpion out of the container once more and placed it on his desk. Avada Kedavra. This spell, unlike the other two, shot out in a blaze of green and hit the scorpion. It surrounded the scorpion and flung it aside before dissipating, leaving a dead husk behind. Only one person has ever survived the cures. All eyes turned towards Harry, but they flinched back, even Moody. His eyes had the same green glow of the killing curse and his lips were curled back in a snarl. His scars only adding to the fierce expression. Neville gripped Harry's shoulder, which snapped him out. Harry turned to his friend, and they shared a look before both boys seemed to find a calm. Moody watched with interest at the interaction. The killing curse takes intent. Moody's words again returned the class to him. All of you could cast it at me and I'd not more than a nosebleed. He said, but privately shivered a bit once he saw the three boys looking at him. Now up, form a line. You're all going to experience the Imperious Curse. Some of the students looked shocked. You need to know what it feels like to fight it. He groused, which seemed to interest the class. Even Susan, who was still a bit shocked, Moody planned to curse them. The first up was Ron Weasley, who looked around wondering how that happened. Moody said the word and Ron looked to Harry as if he spaced out before he belted out an impressive rendition of God Save the Queen. It ended and Ron looked rather shocked, as did the rest of the class. Ron's hand went to his throat as it left behind a twinge. Seamus did an impressive river dance, which was followed by Parvati giving a ballet performance. The line moved forward as students had their turns and then took their seats, all having been placed under the curse successfully. Hannah impersonated a chipmunk much to her chagrin while Ernie hopped around the room on one leg. Susan's turn came and there was a moment of what looked like to Harry a struggle before she jumped on the desk to her side, and another moment where she flexed to jump again only to pause before jumping. Good bones, you resisted it. Moody growled. 5 points to Hufflepuff. Isabel went next and gave Ron Weasley a hug, causing the boy to turn as red as his hair. Isabel shook her head as if to clear cobwebs from it as she took her seat next to Sue. Neville went next and again there was a hesitation before he did an impressive series of acrobatics around the classroom. 5 points to Gryffindor. Good attempt, Longbottom. Moody growled. Neville took his seat, but his friends could see he looked irritated with himself. Wayne came to the front of the line and looked determined. Moody cast at him, Imperio. Nothing happened for a good 5 seconds before he jerkily made his way through a military salute. Moody looked impressed. That's what it looks to fight it off. He shouted to the room. 10 points to Hufflepuff. Harry was next and he looked at Moody with a hard stare. The whole class seemed to lean forward to watch without their say-so. Imperio. The curse was said, and Harry felt as if he was falling into a state of sleep. Actually, it felt like that one time he ate a gummy bear Sal had hidden away. That had been Harry's first and only foray into drugs. He remembered the weightless feeling and loss of control almost instantly and hated. Harry had learned one thing well throughout his young life, and that was he hated losing control of a situation. The class looked on as Moody's face took on a more concentrated look and he jabbed his wand forward again. A thought floated to the front of Harry's mind, jump. It said twice before Harry shook his head and it cleared away. His eyes refocused on Moody. No. His voice was low and gravelly, surprising the class and Moody. They hadn't heard it that bad before. His friends though looked concerned. Harry moved and took a seat at no direction. That was damn impressive, Potter, Moody growled. 10 points to Hufflepuff for fighting off the Imperious Curse. Harry nodded but kept his eyes forward as the rest of the class failed to throw off the curse despite being buoyed by Harry's attempt. The bell tolled and the class started to pack up. Read pages 10 to 20 on the blasting curse for next class. The class exited with some students looking excited and rambling about the epic class while others were pensive. Harry and his friends stopped outside the classroom and leaned against the wall for a few moments. They shared some glances before nodding to each other. "Come on, Nev, I'll go with you to divination," Roger said as he nodded to Oliver. Neville gave the quiet Hufflepuff a grin and they moved away, Roger engaging Neville in a conversation about herbology to take his mind off the class. "We have ancient runes," Isabel said quietly, her usual cheer somewhat subdued. They nodded and started on their way. By the time they came to the ancient runes classroom they were more upbeat. They took their seats and pulled out their hieroglyphs text. They were surprised when the three normally closed-off Slytherins entered with grins. The trio of snakes took their seats in front of the friends and grinned. "The common room has never been so blissfully quiet. You don't happen to know who we should thank?" Daphne Greengrass asked them with a raised eyebrow. This caused them to grin. Harry's voice came out normal for him as spoke. "I dunno what you could possible mean." The three girls giggled and it was joined by Susan and Isabel with Wayne chuckling. "All right class, all ready to get started on hieroglyphs?" Professor Babbling asked cheerfully and then snickered at the look given to her by the students. "Oh, come now, it won't be so bad. The English text is the translation." The class sighed in relief. "Granted you'll be doing assignments in the glyphs, but the point is for you to truly understand how the Egyptians both used it as their written language and in the runic magic." The rest of runes passed with little fanfare, much to the approval of those who had come from defense. They were given another reading assignment for next class. Harry and the others moved out of the classroom when the tone sounded as they nodded their goodbyes to the three Slytherin girls. Harry broke from his friends. "I'm goin' ta see my mum. Meet up later." They nodded, understanding his reasoning. Harry took off at a brisk pace throughout the castle and made his way to the astronomy tower. He knocked on his mum's office door and received a call to enter. Aurora was sitting behind her desk in the more conservative robes she wore for teaching. She gave Harry a smile and transfigured one of the office chairs into something more comfortable. "Harry, to what do I owe the privilege?" Harry shrugged and flopped down into the chair. She cocked her head as she looked at him. He pulled his defense text out and started reading it over. Aurora let him read and went back to grading some papers her 7th years had done over break. She noticed he finished whatever his Dada assignment appeared to be and moved to open his ancient runes texts on her desks. She let him continue and kept one eye on him as she continued her grading. She finished and watched him as went back and forth from the two and took notes. She noticed him trying some hieroglyphs for himself. Finally, he finished his work and looked up at her. She was surprised to sadness in his eyes. "Harry, what happened?" She got up and moved to his side. His voice came out quiet as a whisper. "We went over the unforgivable curses in defense today." "Oh, Harry," she murmured and pulled him for a hug. "It's all right. I didn't know he would start out with them," she muttered. Harry pulled back and looked at her. "They come up in the 4th-year curriculum, but not usually until the end. And only briefly, but somehow I don't think Moody kept to that." Harry shook his head. "No, he showed them to us all." Aurora's eyes narrowed and Harry knew she was irritated. "Paranoid codger," she said, which got Harry to laugh. "How do you feel?" Harry shrugged and shook his head a bit. There was no mark, nothing. "Part of what makes them so terrifying to wizards and witches," Aurora remarked. She held him close to her and he was content to sit there with her. "He tested the Imperius on us," Harry mentioned after a few minutes. Aurora straightened. "What?" She hissed out the word. "I threw it off." Harry said. He sounded proud and also had a grin on his face as Aurora had remained still as stone. "Good." Aurora managed to get out before adding, "Go to supper, I need to speak to Minerva." Harry nodded and pushed himself forward. Aurora stopped him and gave him one more hug before he left. He grinned as he heard, "Son of a bitch." He started whistling as he made his way to the Great Hall. Harry took his seat at the Hufflepuff table, and his friends looked at him curiously. "Mum's pissed." His friends burst out laughing, knowing Moody was in for it, and Sue grinned dangerously. "Wait until my aunt gets my owl." This caused them even more laughter, much to the amusement of those around them. "Damn China, they're not playing, are they?" Wayne said as they came down to the potions lab. Mr. Filch was being trailed by his cat as he furiously scrubbed a picture frame housing quartet of wizards singing. They were currently stumbling around as Filch worked, making the teens chuckle. The Hufflepuffs nodded and filed into the room and took seats in the back, leaving the front half for the Slytherins. "I hate sharing classes with the Goldilocks," Wayne muttered as Slytherin poured into the classroom led by Malfoy. Malfoy sneered at the Hufflepuffs, leftovers. His two goons laughed loudly while Pansy Parkinson giggled this high-pitched screech, laugh. "I thought only dying cats made that noise, not pugs," Izzy sneered back at them. The Hufflepuffs laughed and Harry spied a few Slytherins grinning behind the cohort of mini Death Eaters. "Why, you little—" Pansy started forward with Malfoy pulling his wand, but they were cut off by their professor's greeting. "Ho there, take your seats, sorry for the delay," Slughorn said, coming out of his office without looking up. "Take your seats," Slughorn said surprisingly stiffly once he did look up and spied the confrontation. He shot his Slytherins a glare. "Today we're going to brew the pepper-up potion." "What does the pepper-up potions treat?" Slughorn asked once they took their seats. "Miss Moon. The common cold and hypothermia," she answered succinctly. Good 5 points to Slytherin." The Slytherins who followed Malfoy around grinned at the Hufflepuffs and got eye rolls in return. "Now you'll be happy to know this potion has less disgusting ingredients," he said, getting a round of laughs from the students. "The main ingredients are elderberry, a popular immune booster throughout the world, both wizarding and muggle." As he spoke, many of the students took notes as words appeared behind him on the board. "Then we have peppermint leaves, dried billywig stings, fire seed and salamander blood." "I thought you said not disgusting," Wayne snarked at the last one, causing the class to laugh. "Less disgusting, my boy," Slughorn said with a grin to match Wayne's and winked to the class. "Now you need to be extra careful about the fire seed, you need only one for a batch of pepper-up potion." "Does anyone know why?" Harry grinned as he stuck his hand up. "Yes, Mr. Potter. It causes fires," Harry said quietly, though the sparkle of mischief in his eyes reminded Slughorn of Harry's father. Slughorn chuffed. "I take it Lord Black's been teaching you some potions." Harry and his friends grinned. "But it does indeed cause fires, so you'll need to add it once your cauldron has cooled. It is also most notably an ingredient in pepper imps from Honeydukes." Many of the students looked interested in that tidbit. "Now it's a fairly straightforward potion, so it'll be a good chance for me to see where your brewing skills are after the summer. Once you complete the potion, we seal it with a final spell which I will supervise. Off you go, the fire seed will be on my desk. If you brew the potion well enough for the hospital wing, I'll give you extra credit." That got the attention of many of the class, and they moved quickly to take their ingredients out and prep them. Harry worked his way through the potion, helping Wayne a time or two with measures of ingredients. "Watch the potions," Harry muttered to Wayne as he moved to go to Slughorn's desk for the fire seed. Harry nodded in the direction of Malfoy. "Gotcha," Wayne said as he added his salamander blood. Wayne held his wand in his hand as he stirred. Harry grabbed the 2 fire seeds and dodged a curse that was shot at him. Slughorn saw the flash out of the corner of his eye and whirled around. The spell hit the wall with a crash as part of the stone chipped away. "Wands away now," Slughorn snapped and glared at the class. Slughorn waved his wand and the potions in the class seemed to freeze. His stasis charm took hold. "Everyone sit down and place your wand in front of you on the desk." The class looked shifted nervously as they did what instructed. Slughorn started at the back with the Hufflepuffs. Prior incantado. The spell enveloped Ernie Macmillan's wand and an echo of the animal transfiguration spell appeared. Some of the students glanced around nervously. Harry was eyeing Malfoy, who seemed to be keeping his control for once. Harry and the rest of the Hufflepuffs' wands, much like Ernie's, only had their last transfiguration spell. Harry moved his gaze to the goon squad and noticed Goyle fidgeting in his seat next to Pansy. "Well, Mr. Knott, that's a detention and I'll be having a chat with Professor Flitwick." The Slytherin boy groaned, and his head hit the desk. A cheat spell had come up. He shot his fellow Slytherins a glare, his eyes zeroed in on the desk with Pansy and Goyle. Slughorn came to Malfoy's desk and glared at the boy, and his widened in slight surprise to find his last spell was a locking charm. Crabbe passed as well. Goyle and Pansy were last, and Slughorn performed the spell over Goyle's wand, cleared, leaving only Pansy's. "Prior incantano," Slughorn said in a resigned tone. An echo of a minor cutting hex appeared in a smoky form. Miss Parkinson, make you way to the headmistress's office without delay. I will be there as soon as class ends. She glared at the desk and went to grab her wand, but Professor Slughorn had taken it. You will not be needing this. He pocketed the wand. She huffed in annoyance and stormed out of the room, shooting a glare at Harry. 20 points from Slytherin. The Slytherins groaned. I had hoped I already stressed how important safety is in potions. This is a final warning for everyone in this classroom. If any of you interfere with another student's potion again, I will see you suspended and banished from my classroom. The rest of the class passed in silence except for the final sealing spells. Harry and the Hufflepuffs were out of class as soon as it ended, eager to not have to deal with whatever whiny rubbish would come from Malfoy. What a dumbarse, Isabel stated once they entered the common room. The Hufflepuff fourth years laughed. Who's a dumbarse? Cedric asked from his spot playing chess against one of his friends. Parkinson shot a cutting curse at Harry during potions, Sue answered. The older Hufflepuffs looked over Harry for any damage. Harry dodged. Sue added, seeing the looks, and Cedric nodded. Wayne laughed, and then Slughorn checked everyone's wand. The pug got caught and so did not for having used a cheat spell in charms. The Hufflepuffs listening joined in the laughter. Thank Merlin we got rid of Snape, a sixth year chipped in. Harry and Wayne dropped their bags next to a study table with Susan and Isabel. The four pulled out their transfiguration texts. They worked on their animal transfiguration for a good hour before it was time for them to head to dinner. The four Hufflepuffs went with a bit of a spring in their step. Not only was the potion ready for Malfoy, but Dumbledore was going to be at dinner tonight with Ludo Bagman. Harry was tipped off by the house elves that they were going over some final planning before the other schools showed up next week. The fourth-year Hufflepuffs laughed when they noticed Pansy getting a death stare from some of the older Slytherins. It was apparent why once they looked to the hourglasses holding the points. Slytherin only had a handful of green gems left. Harry gave a low whistle. Damn, Aunt Minnie must be pissed. The pug probably threw a tantrum. Is commented with a laugh. They sat down to dinner and waited. Harry, Wayne, is up for a bet on the Falmouth game. Roger asked with a grin towards one of the Hufflepuff fifth years, McGiffin, who usually ran a betting pool on Quidditch. Falmouth kicked off against Bellycastle. Bellycastle by 50, Isabel said without hesitation and stuck her tongue out at her friends before handing over a galleon. Wayne looked outraged and countered, Falmouth by 100. He pulled out some sickles to give to McGiffin. Harry shrugged before pulling out some sickles from his pocket, Falmouth by 20. Wayne looked at Harry with faux betrayal, causing others to laugh. I like my money. Harry grinned and Wayne laughed. Anyone else? McGiffin asked. I've got Puddlemere over Montrose by 40. Appleby over the Cannons by 150. That was chorused by boos from those Quidditch fans around the table. A bang followed by a flash was heard throughout the hall. All eyes went to the Slytherin table where the flash originated. A yell that quickly turned into a high-pitched squeal was let out by a certain blonde as he shrunk down into a tiny troll about 5 inches tall. All eyes in the hall followed the noise to the Slytherin table. Laughter rang out as Crabbe, looking confused, picked up a struggling, ugly-looking blonde troll in Slytherin robes, complete with, instead of a wand, a club. The little troll was yelling at Crabbe and hit him with the club. Ah! Crabbe dropped the little troll and shook his head and rubbed the knuckle that had been whacked. More laughter was heard as the Malfoy troll landed in a bowl of dressing. More laughter followed, and at the head table Professor Slughorn let out a long-suffering sigh before getting up and walking to his house's table. He fished the blonde troll out of the dressing, waved his wand to clean the troll off, and then left the hall to more laughter. The headmistress stood only to be interrupted by another bang and flash of light that blinded the hall. A purple haze was to the right of the headmistress. A loud "bah" was heard through the smoke. The smoke cleared, and standing on the seat where Dumbledore had been seating was a goat with an impressive beard dressed in Dumbledore's purple and yellow robes. Another "bah" was let out, and the goat had a bewildered look as it looked around. Behind the head table more purple smoke seemed to flow out of the large windows and spelled into existence, Miss Purple, Mr. Orange, and Mr. Green, hope you enjoyed the festivities. All right, Hufflepuff, Professor Sprout said as the whole of the house gathered in the common room. You all looked splendid, proud badgers you are. Her cheerful voice made them grin as she looked them over. Let's go meet our new arrivals. She led the house out of the common room and up to the first floor of the castle. The day was finally here for the other two schools to arrive, and truthfully the students of Hogwarts couldn't wait, if only to get their professors to relax. The past month had been filled with endless etiquette drills, cleaning, and massive amounts of points lost. The only highlight had been an unexpected prank from the Reavers that turned the professors into raccoons for a day, causing classes to be cancelled. It also had the pleasant side effect of the teachers realizing they had perhaps taken things a bit to the extreme with their preparations. As it was, you could see your reflection perfectly in every suit of armor at Hogwarts. The Hufflepuffs lined up by year as they waited in the courtyard with the other houses. Ravenclaw was on their right while on their left, and Gryffindor on their right while Slytherin next to Ravenclaw. All the years were dressed in their full uniforms and lined up by year. The professors also appeared to be in their best robes, all bearing on outer robe with the Hogwarts emblem on it. Harry looked around and found his mum. She grinned and winked at him. She gestured for him to turn back around. As he did, one of the Gryffindor first years shouted, "Up there! It's a flying house!" The students snickered but did turn and saw a shape growing bigger and bigger as it flew towards them. Hagrid broke from the ranks and held up to large flares, directing what the students could now see was a massive carriage being pulled by winged horses. "Core, that's big," Wayne whistled lowly. "The carriage or the horses?" Iz asked. "Both. They're Abraxans," Harry said quietly. "Bobadans breeds them," Oliver mentioned. "Damn," Roger whistled this time, and everyone's eyes widened as they turned back to face the carriage. "Talk about big. She's taller than Hagrid." Out of the powder blue carriage strode a large, beautiful woman decked out in fine black robes and dark jewelry that only made her look more imposing. The large female looked at the grounds of Hogwarts and then its students with a small smile. Headmistress McGonagall strode forward. "Madame Maxime, welcome to Hogwarts." She spoke in a loud, clear, welcoming voice. "Professor McGonagall, thank you for hosting us," the woman said with an accented voice. As she spoke, students filled out of the carriage. They were dressed in fine powder blue silk robes. They shivered slightly as a Scottish breeze blew throughout the courtyard. "Perhaps you all would like to wait inside," Headmistress McGonagall said, noticing some of the students shivering. "Ravenclaw will be hosting you all." Madame Maxime grinned at her students who nodded. "We would." The headmistress gestured for the Bobadans contingent to enter, and Professor Flitwick broke from the ranks to escort them. Many of the Hogwarts students snickered at the height difference, though they were silenced by a look from their headmistress. The students either turned back around or watched as Hagrid tangled with the large horses, moving the carriage off. "This is rather underwhelming," Iz complained as the Hogwarts student continued to wait. They had been waiting, and even the most well-behaved students were starting to fidget. Harry looked at the headmistress and noticed her lips were pursed in irritation. "The lake." Lee Jordan, the Gryffindor friend of the twins, shouted, causing everyone to turn to the Black Lake. It was bubbling, and slowly a mast rose out of the water, followed by an old galleon warship. The warship appeared entirely above the water finally and bobbed there before resting. The flags unfurled and the crest of Durmstrang was flying as a plank was thrown from the boat to reach the grounds of Hogwarts. The students of Durmstrang were led out of the ship by a tall man in white fur robes. He marched the troop up to the courtyard. Harry noticed his headmistress's smile was somewhat forced. "Headmaster Karkaroff," she greeted him and gestured to the students dressed in large brown fur robes and hats. "Durmstrang, welcome to Hogwarts." Karkaroff gave somewhat of a grin, showing off yellow teeth, and nodded. "Headmistress McGonagall, Durmstrang thanks you for hosting us." He looked past the headmistress into Hogwarts with hard look to decipher in his eyes. Harry narrowed his as he tried to unpiece it and landed on derision. He moved his eyes to his mum's and looked over to Karkaroff. She nodded to Harry with a warning in her eyes. Harry nodded back, but it turned into a snicker as he heard Iz speak. "Ew. Did you see his teeth?" Isabel muttered, causing laughs and shared looks of disgust by those near her. "Azkaban will do that," Oliver said with some surprising venom in his tone. "He's a Death Eater." That got the attention of the Hufflepuffs that heard him. Harry now understood his mum's look and the headmistress's hidden irritation. "Please join us inside. Hufflepuff will be hosting you." She gestured for Durmstrang contingent to make their way into the castle. The Hufflepuffs caught a bit of derision on the face of the Durmstrang headmaster at the name of their house. "Well, someone just moved to the top of the prank list," Izzy snarked. The three Reavers nodded in return. The rest of Hufflepuff gave the Durmstrang headmaster a glare that even made the Slytherins step back, much to the amusement of the Hogwarts professors. The headmistress cleared her throat, and the students got the message and moved to the Great Hall. The headmistress shared a look with Professor Sprout, who grinned widely. The professors followed their students, who remained surprisingly orderly while being led into the hall by the Hufflepuffs. The students filed in and were surprised to see the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang students standing as the Hogwarts students took their seats. The two schools only took their seats once their respective heads sat. The Durmstrang students shed their outer coats as they sat. They looked less intimidating without the heavy bulk of their furs. It was then that whispers were heard, and Wayne and Izzy both gasped. Harry turned and raised his eyebrow at the two. "Victor Crumb," Izzy whispered, nodding to the Durmstrang contingent sitting at the front of the Hufflepuff table. "Shite, think he mind an autograph?" Wayne muttered. "Probably best not to ask on the first night," Susan laughed. "Right," Wayne said, still starstruck. Harry laughed at his friend before turning his attention to the head table. Headmistress McGonagall narrowed her eyes at her students' whisperings, which is all it took for them to stop. Harry looked around at the newcomers while his headmistress welcomed them to the school. Most of the Durmstrang students were looking around the Great Hall with interest, especially the ceiling. The Beauxbatons students meanwhile had varying looks of contempt or boredom. Harry caught Susan's eyes and nodded to the front of the Ravenclaw table. Susan grinned. "Beauxbatons is rather palatial." Iz snorted. "French." Their friends chuckled quietly. The food appeared and Harry realized he tuned out the welcome speech. Harry looked over the food selection and noticed some foreign dishes among the usual. "I bet Blitz was thrilled they had more to cook." Harry spoke quietly, his voice somewhat gravelly, cluing his friends into his discomfort with the new additions, especially as one of the Durmstrang students noticed his scar, and this time whispers of his moniker were heard. Even some of the Beauxbatons students turned. Harry kept his face blank, but his friends on the other hand shot the foreign students a glare. The rest of the meal went rather normally for a Hogwarts meal, with din of talk about classes and the upcoming tournament. Dessert appeared and Harry helped himself to some creme brulee. As dessert finished, Dumbledore stood from his seat at McGonagall's direction. Dumbledore was dressed in maroon robes with star patterns on it. Many of the Hogwarts professors had groaned when they saw the robes earlier. Even Bagman looked presentable in black suit, though his outer robe was bumblebee yellow. "Thank you for the magnificent meal, Hogwarts, and such a warm welcome." A few Beauxbatons students snorted. "What? They don't have warming charms in France." The sarcastic comment surprised many when it came from second-year Ravenclaw girl, who rolled her eyes. Most of Hogwarts and Durmstrang started snicker, leaving those from Beauxbatons blushing and their headmistress to frown. Headmistress McGonagall cleared her throat and the students quieted, though Harry spied amusement in her eyes. Dumbledore then cleared his throat, though it could have been easily classed as a laugh. "This year I have the pleasure of working with my colleagues across our countries and school to bring back the most prestigious Triwizard Tournament." Dumbledore spoke, a tight voice, not that Bagman seemed to notice as he led the cheer that was taken up by the students in the hall. Dumbledore's fellow government officials from Bulgaria and France clapped politely. "So Durmstrang's in Bulgaria?" Harry asked quietly as people were still cheering. He noticed the Bulgarian version of Bagman from the Quidditch World Cup. "Nobody's sure, but it answers to the Bulgarian ministry," Oliver answered as the clapping died down. "Eternal glory awaits those who win the tournament, but take heed, for the tasks you will be asked to complete are not for the faint of heart." Dumbledore spoke, giving all the students a hard stare. "As you know, only those who turn 17 by midnight tonight may enter their name into the competition tomorrow." "Mr. Filch, if you please," Dumbledore called. The doors to the Great Hall opened and in walked Mr. Filch with his Mrs. Norris trailing him. He was carrying a large chest that seemed too much for him. It towered over him as he huffed and puffed up to the front stairs. Wayne groaned. "That's a bloody great impression on him." Some of the Hufflepuffs snickered while others grimaced. Mr. Filch lugged the chest to a rather simple pedestal Dumbledore levitated in front of the head table at the center. Mr. Filch set it on with a loud thunk. Mr. Filch slinked off as Dumbledore reached his arm up with his wand and touched the top of the chest. With a trickle of sparks the chest slowly disappeared, leaving with it a large dark clay goblet. Dumbledore gave another tap of his wand and whoosh of blue flames enveloped the goblet before settling above the rim. The Goblet of Fire. Those that seek entrance need only to cast their name into the goblet. As of this moment I declare the Triwizard Tournament. A loud bang and a flash of silver and gold fireworks exploded over the head table. As the gold and silver sparks fell and landed on the foreign dignitaries, laughter rocked the room. Dumbledore was replaced by an impressive hog. Ludo Bagman was buzzing around the head table, now a bumblebee, while the French Minister for International Magical Cooperation was now an impressive eagle draped in a Ravenclaw scarf. The Bulgarian head of International Magical Cooperation was now a roaring lion with a felt top hat attached to his head that was red and gold Gryffindor colors. Madame Maxime had shrunk down to a green coil of a hissing snake that flashed silver. Finally, the Durmstrang headmaster was half on the table as a growling badger with a Hufflepuff scarf on. Another explosion with more silver and gold blasts formed the words, "The Reavers welcome you to Hogwarts. Prepare to lose." A cheer went up through the Hogwarts students while Headmistress McGonagall muttered something and stood up with a flick of her wand. The animals were reverted to normal. As you know by now, when caught the Reavers will be punished. You're all dismissed to your common rooms, now. She turned and started to try and soothe the ruffled feathers of the foreign ministry workers. Her fellow headmasters, while annoyed, seemed easier to placate. Well, Madame Maxime anyways. Headmaster Kararkov stormed off, much to the amusement of the Durmstrang students who followed. Harry woke up with a groan which turned into a gasp as Ali pounced on him. Really? His gravelly voice barely heard. Harry grimaced and quickly reached over, taking a swig of his potion. He felt a soothing sensation and he turned back to Ali, giving him scratch on his head. Ali meowed at him and flicked his tail. Yeah, I know. Ali took a few more scratches before he moved over to curl up on Harry's now vacant pillow. Harry looked around the dorm room and noticed only Wayne was still asleep. Harry got up and dressed in a pair of jeans and grabbed a Falmouth t-shirt. He put on his chucks just as Wayne jerked awake with a slight yell. "Prides," Wayne said, horrified. Harry started laughing and even Ali's whiskers twitched at him. "Shut it, that was right horrifying." Wayne started to get dressed and Harry made for the bathroom. Harry finished and Wayne went in. Harry took out of his drawer an ice mice and let Ali play with it. Wayne came out and laced up his boots. "Right, let's get some grub," Wayne said and steered the unhappy Harry out of their dorm room. They got to the common room, which was surprisingly empty for a Saturday. Susan and Isabel were there chatting with some fifth-year girls. They all had arithmancy textbooks open. Susan looked up. "Hey guys," Isabel waved at them without looking up. The blonde girl was correcting something. The fifth year, Samantha White, Harry now recognized as she turned to give the two boys a grin. "We wanted to wait for you guys," Susan said and made her own correction before closing the textbook and rolling up her parchment. "Thanks," Wayne said with a yawn. "Where is everybody?" "Camped out in the Great Hall watching there for people who are entering," Samantha said as Isabel ran her and Susan's textbooks back to their dorm. "They're just watching," Harry rasped. Susan looked concerned at the sound. "Well, it is breakfast too," Samantha laughed but nodded her head at Harry's unspoken thoughts. "Speaking of, let's go eat." The small group made their way out of the Hufflepuff common room and up to the Great Hall. They walked in to find the tables packed with students from all houses and the two visiting schools. Harry trudged over to the end seats closest to the exit and farthest from the goblet. The two fifth years chuckled and waved goodbye as they moved closer to the middle where their friends were. The four Hufflepuff fourth years were joined by Neville, who came over from the Gryffindor table, and Oliver and Roger moving down. "You missed Fawcett from Ravenclaw trying to get in," Roger said with a laugh. He grew a biker stash. That at least got Harry to smile. Food appeared around them and Harry grabbed some toast and eggs. "What's with the blue circle?" Wayne asked, noticing the ring around the cup. "It's an age line. Dumbledore was here to draw it this morning," Neville answered. Harry grimaced at his words. Susan bumped her shoulder into him and gave him a small grin. Harry nodded and his expression cleared. He started eating his eggs quietly without really participating in the conversation. As they were eating, a contingent of Beauxbaton's students came in, causing a hush to fall over the room. Harry watched as they crossed the line without issue and placed their names into the cup still spouting its flames. The flames flared red then faded back to blue and some of the Hogwarts students clapped politely. Harry just continued eating but looked up as cheer was heard. The twins came into the great hall with grins on their faces. Harry grinned but shook his head at his friends. George spoke first. "Are you ready, Hogwarts?" Fred then picked up and said, "Finished cooking it up this morning." More cheers were heard as they held up the potion vials. Fred and George crossed their arms with the potion vials. "Ready, Forge," Fred said. "Ready, Gred," George answered. Bottoms up. They shot the potion in one large gulp. Nothing seemed to happen. Did it work? The question came from Wayne. It was a good one as everybody seemed to be wondering. "They're 16 so not much of it is needed," Isabel replied as the twins walked through the age line. Cheers from the Hogwarts students were heard as nothing happened. The twins walked to the cup and placed 2 slips of paper in. The flames flared red and more cheers were heard. Harry joined in the celebration for the two. Just as Wayne went to call out to the twins, the flames flared black and 2 streaks of black flame flew towards the twins and covered them in smoke while sending them flying out of the age line. Harry and his friends shot up from the table and ran over to the twins. Lee Jordan and the Gryffindor chasers joined them with concerned looks. The looks faded into grins as the smoke cleared, revealing the twins unharmed but sporting 2 impressive gray beards and balding gray hair. Laughter rang through the halls. The twins glanced at each other and far from being upset started laughing until a familiar voice rang out. That would detention Mr. and Mr. Weasley, Headmistress McGonagall had appeared at the entrance. She effectively dispersed the students who had gathered around the twins. The twins just grinned at her, making her shake her head. Harry went back to his seat to finish his breakfast. The twins and their friends joined the 4th-year Hufflepuffs. "Nice try, mates," Wayne grinned at them. "We aim to please," the twins said together. "Hi guys. We're trying to set up a pickup game," Angelina Johnson told the group. "You guys in?" Katie asked. "Definitely," Wayne grinned. "If it gets me away from that bloody cup, hell yes," Harry said with a wry grin. The Gryffindors chuckled. "We're going to see who else can play," Katie replied. "We're missing a seeker and a keeper this year." "Yeah, we're down a keeper too," Harry replied. He knew Sylvester had been planning to try out. "Great, we're going to go see if Grant or any other Ravens want in," Alicia added, standing from the table with the 2 other chasers. "Meet us at the pitch in 10. "Yeah, we'll go see who's in the common room and get our brooms," Wayne said, finishing his breakfast. "We'll go to the pitch," Fred said, still sporting his beard. "And get the chest out," George finished. "And we'll spread the word," Izzy said with a grin as her and Susan left the table. They all took off to their respective destinations. Harry and Wayne making their way back to the common room. Wayne looked at his friend with a serious look on his face for once. "You really think your name's gonna come out?" he asked. "I dunno, but I've got a bad feelin' about all of this," Harry replied with a frown and his voice rougher than Wayne had heard in a while. "Yaw, challenging Trelawney?" Wayne asked, causing Harry to give a snort of disdain before grinning. Wayne clapped his friend on the shoulder as they walked. Harry just nodded at him as they continued in silence. The 2 boys made it to the common room where students of various years were catching up homework or with friends. "Oi Sly," Wayne called as they entered the common room. The 5th year looked up from his group of friends playing gobstones. "We're playing a pickup game, you in?" Sly jumped up, causing the cards to fly and explode, leaving his friends protesting and giving him a shove. Sly just grinned. "You bet." He ran to the dorms and Harry snickered before he and Wayne followed. They grabbed their kits from their room and met back up with Sly. "You guys know where Cedric is?" Harry rasped as they got to the common room again. "He's with Cho," one of Cedric's year mates said with a grin. Maybe the chasers will find him," Wayne said with a shrug as they left the common room. They weren't alone, being followed by a good number of puffs that had been lounging around. "Got to tell ya, I'm pissed this tournament is taking Quidditch out of the year," Sly mentioned. "It's not like it's going to be an event every month," he griped. "Preach," Harry's raspy voice said with a laugh. It gained laughs from the crowd of people but a look from Wayne. His voice was too raspy. Wayne slung his arm Harry's shoulder as they walked down the grounds. Before they got to the stadium, they could hear crowd noise causing the students to speed up. The Quidditch stadium was packed for a simple pickup game. The three Hufflepuff players went to the locker room to change and were met by Ray and Roger Davis, who nodded to the boys. "No, James?" Harry asked. He and Travis were in the library trying to finish a transfiguration project. Roger Davis, the sixth-year captain of the Ravenclaw team, answered. Travis was a seventh-year Ravenclaw chaser. "If I keep looking at my arithmancy textbook, I'm going to light it on fire." I needed a break. That set off a round of laughter as the twins entered the locker room along with their younger brother. "What are we laughing at?" George asked with grin. "The misery of arithmancy," Sly said with another laugh at Roger's expense. Fred and George joined in. "Hey Ron, yeah, carrying on the Weasley tradition." Wayne greeted the other fourth year with a grin. Ron nodded and gave a half-smile half-grimace. "I was hoping to," Ron said and started changing into some older keeper gear. "Ronikins is a keeper," Fred said, surprising others in the locker room with little teasing. "Well, you definitely have the build for," Roger commented, "and even Percy could fly, at least that's what our old captain told me. Never saw him near a broom personally." That had the three Weasley boys laughing loudly, drawing looks from the others in the locker. "We play Quidditch at home. No one's allowed to sit out when everyone is back home," Ron explained as he finished putting on his gear. "Might be why dear old," George started. "Percykins moved out so fast," Fred said. "And doesn't come back," George traded off. "Or he's just an ass," Ron said with an eye roll. "That too," both twins said as they walked out of the locker room, almost running into Cedric. Cedric's hair was a little tousled, causing the boys to grin at him. "Oh, shut up," he said, cutting them all off. "I'll be out in a minute." The group were surprised to see a good-sized crowd had made their way to the stands. Lee Jordan was even up by the mic station. Madam Hooch was also there, and she waved them over. Natsumi and the Gryffindor chasers were standing next to her. The last two to come out the locker rooms were Cedric and Ginny Weasley. "No Cho?" Wayne asked his seeker as he waggled his eyebrows. Cedric grimaced a little. She didn't want to play. He spied Harry and the twins' grins, and cut them off. "Shut it." They snickered. Somebody was going to be in trouble. "Madam Hooch," it was Wayne that asked as their flying professor and Quidditch supervisor walked over. "You're not the only ones that are bored," she said to the Quidditch players, causing snickers. "Now how do you all want to do teams? How about we switch it up?" Roger suggested. Many of the players nodded or said their agreement aloud. "Right, well, we have 3 of the 4 captains here." Angelina was going to get the badge for Gryffindor. The 2 male captains looked at each other and nodded before Cedric spoke up. "I'll cede to Angelina." "Thanks, Cede," Angelina said with a smile. "Easy enough," Madam Hooch said with a grin. "Well, ladies first." Angelina looked at the players around her and after some contemplation, Alicia. Her fellow Grief moved to stand next to her. Roger wasted no time. "Cedric." Angelina looked torn and her glance moved from the twins to Katie, the final chaser line piece. "George." Roger grinned. "Fred. Can't let you have both." The twins preened, causing laughter. Angelina rolled her eyes but then grinned. "Katie." Roger frowned. Cedric leaned over and muttered something under his breath. "Sly." Roger picked his goalie, the first untested player. George nodded to Ron to join him. "Over here, Ronikins," as he was the only other player in keeper pads. Ron gave him a shove as he walked over, much to George's amusement. Angelina looked over at Ginny and asked George what position she played. Harry knew from conversations over the summer that Ginny could double as a seeker or chaser. "Ginny, feel like playing seeker?" Ginny nodded. "Yeah, sure." She was given a cheer by her 2 siblings. As she moved to join Angelina's side, Natsumi and Ray moved over to Roger, who nodded to them. It left Wayne and Harry. Wayne struck a pose and flexed for them. Harry snorted. "What, gotta show off the goods?" The players started laughing. Even Madam Hooch was laughing. "Wayne," Roger called. Angelina grinned. "Told ya." Wayne nudged Harry and winked. Harry just shook his head and joined Angelina's team. She gave him a high five and George threw his arm around Harry. It was only their years of friendship that stopped Harry from flinching. "All right, hold still," Madam Hooch called and waved her wand over Angelina's side and their Quidditch gear team colors were changed to all white. She repeated the process with Roger's team and they were changed to all black gear. Take a few and talk over your game plans, then we'll start. Angelina led her group over to right side of the pitch while Roger went to across the pitch. Angelina turned and looked to Harry. Do you know much about Sylvester? Harry nodded, and when he spoke it took the other Gryffindors by surprise with how gravely his voice came out. He's good, a lot more like Wood than Artie. George laid a hand on Harry's shoulder and squeezed, something both younger Weasleys noticed. It was something their older brothers did to help their younger siblings relax. George spoke. That means he'll rely on his length more than broom movement. The opposite of Ron, Ginny said. Right, and Ginny's going to be able to keep on par with Cedric in terms of speed. She can fly faster than Charlie, George said with a grin. As long as it's not a straight away, Ron said, nodding to the brooms. Ginny frowned, but George quickly changed that when he nudged Harry. Harrykins and I will just have to make Seed uncomfortable, George grinned. Harry smirked, nodding his agreement. You want Fred or Wayne? Harry looked over at his two friends in black and shrugged, his voice quiet but steadier. They both play the same. Then I'll take. He was grinning wickedly but was cut off by Angelina. Harry, take Fred. Last thing I need is those two wrestling on brooms in the middle of the pitch. Angelina rolled her eyes, causing George to pout, and the two younger Weasleys started snickering. You wound me, George remarked. Right, our line is still intact and our usual starting marks are the same, Angelina grinned. Ginny, if you don't track the snitch right away, time up the game a bit first. Cedric likes to be in on plays. It should give you time to get used to the speed. Ron, she turned to Ron, but he was looking at the stands that had filled up. Ron, she called louder, and he snapped his head around facing her. He looked a little green to Harry. Natsumi's the trickiest of the three you're against. Harry nodded and added, she scores more than both of them. Roger hesitates, he's too analytical. Harry's right, he likes to set up plays, gives us time to hit him, George tacked on. Ray's brute force, he'll break your wrist if you half-ass a save. Alicia said, grimacing. She intercepted a few of his throws bodily. Madam Hooch whistled, and suddenly Lee Jordan's voice rang out. Welcome Hogwarts and visitors to the All Blacks versus the Albinos. Harry and his team groaned, as did half the crowd while the others snickered. Jordan, Madam Hooch's amplified voice rang out. Well then, you lazy sods, pick the names. His voice called back. This time most of the stadium erupted in laughter. Angelina smirked and fired a spell where Jordan's commentating box was. Oi, he shouted as he ducked, but then grinned when he looked at where the spell hit. Burned at the wood from the spell was an outline of a howling wolf. The white wolves, another yelp boomed out as Roger's spell hit next to him again. Versus the black dragons. This time the fans in the stands cheered and Madam Hooch nodded approvingly. Harry was about to mount his broom when he noticed Ron glancing at the crowd nervously. Harry walked up beside him and gave him a nudge. It might be a lil more regulation than your backyard, but it counts the same. Ron nodded. A lot more people, he said in the quietest voice Harry had ever heard the redhead use. Really? Woulda thought this was a regular Weasley family reunion, Harry grinned. Ron started to turn red with anger until he tore his gaze from the crowd and saw Harry's grin. Ron let out a low laugh. We'd need a few more redheads for that, George said, coming up by the two. Let's go, Ronikins, time to kick Fred's ass. George grinned at Harry as Ron mounted his broom and flew towards the goal posts. Thanks, Harry. George nodded to his brother and Harry grinned again. Are you ladies ready yet? Wayne yelled out to George and Harry. Harry turned and flipped him off. Pretty sure Angie and the girls might take exception to that, George yelled back as they mounted their brooms and flew up to take their places. Sure enough, the three chasers looked irritated at Wayne. Wayne waved at them, causing Madam Hooch to snort as she moved to release the balls. Madam Hooch releases the snitch and bludgers, Lee's voice rang out. And the quaffle's up. Grabbed by Angelina, Harry shot towards a bludger, beating Wayne out and sent it careening at Natsumi, clearing a passing lane for Katie. Harry took off down the field after another bludger. Wayne dived down in front of him, driving him off course, and shot a bludger at Katie, who dodged and passed to Alicia, only for it to be picked off by Roger, but George nailed him with a bludger, causing him to drop the quaffle. Natsumi recovers the quaffle and races down the pitch. Lee's voice rang in around the stadium, and Harry banked his broom, racing towards a bludger. He beat out Wayne, his broom making the difference. He contacted the bludger just as one slammed into him. It sent his wide of Natsumi but caused her to release her shot early. Saved by Weasley. Lee's voice rang as Harry shook out his left arm from the bludger hit. Wayne shot into him while he was distracted and raced after a bludger, sending it at Angelina. Harry banked left and dove under Wayne and shot up, forcing his friend into a spin. Harry took off down the field and merged paths with George as they swarmed towards Fred, who was about to hit a bludger at Alicia, now with the quaffle. "George," Harry called in his loudest voice and nodded to the bludger. "Got it." They broke George, continuing towards Fred as Harry swerved and lined himself up to redirect the bludger. He swung at it and took Roger out of his flight path. Alicia passed to Angelina and she drew her arm back to shoot as another bludger hit Ray into Sylvester's view. Johnson scores. The White Wolves go up 10-0. Harry didn't pause to celebrate, and neither did George. As they raced after bludgers, Wayne crashed into Harry and Fred into George before the two dragons walloped the bludgers at Wolves chasers and allowed Ray to throw a long pass down to Natsumi, who dived under Katie and came up shooting. The pass just slipped past Ron's fingers. The Black Dragons even it out as Weasley just missed the block. Lee's voice rang out. Ron looked downcast, but Angelina called out to him. "Chin up, Ron. Pass it out." Angelina grinned. Ron nodded and tossed the quaffle to his captain. The small exchange was forgotten in moments as the play resumed, streaking around the pitch. Harry continued his battle with Wayne as the match continued. It took another 5 minutes before a further goal was scored, this time for the Wolves. It was followed by 2 goals in quick succession for the Dragons. Harry pulled back and shot at a bludger, sending it at Ray, who was shooting. The bludger cracked his arm guard and Ron made the save despite the strength on it. Weasley makes a brilliant save and passes out the quaffle to Belle. Lee's voice was heard as a cheer went up for the Wolves. Harry shot into play, blocking Roger as Katie went past and then took after another bludger. He got to it as Wayne slammed into him. He twisted and got his bat on to the bludger before flying after it again. He turned and shot the bludger at Natsumi, knocking her away from the Alicia, who faked her shot and passed to Angelina. Johnson scores. Lee's voice was heard. The match sped on with the Wolves scoring 3 in quick succession as the Gryffindor chaser line proved their dominance when working together. Diggory's seen the snitch. Harry turned on a dime and located Cedric, who was flying towards his own goal posts with Ginny on his tail. Harry whirled to his left and spied a bludger going towards Alicia with the quaffle. Harry sped towards it, knowing it was going to hit Alicia. He flew past as it contacted his teammate and he jerked his broom back towards the pitch as the bludger bounced off Alicia. Harry swung at it and sent it speeding at Cedric. Diggory's hit by a bludger to his side. Harry grinned and then groaned, and so is Weasley. Ginny's broom was hit by the bludger sent at her by Fred. Harry spun on his broom back into play, hearing Lee announce the snitch was missing. "This is shaping up to be quite the match," Lee announced. Weasley blocks a shot by Roger. Scores tied now for the last 10 minutes of play. The lead had changed back and forth between the teams at least 6 times before settling to a stalemate. And Potter nails the quaffle out of Roger's arm. It's picked up by Belle. Katie took it down the pitch and passed to Angelina, who tossed it over to Alicia. Alicia dropped down as Katie passed over and grabbed the pass. Katie shot and Sly blocked it while taking a bludger to the arm. It dropped and Angelina put the quaffle through on the follow-up. Johnson scores. Harry turned out of the side of his vision. He saw Ginny pull even with Cedric on a snitch run. Harry took off to the nearest bludger and got a hit off as Wayne slammed into him again, forcing him into the siding with a loud thunk. Diggory's broom hit by the bludger. Weasley reaches out and grabs the snitch. The White Wolves win. "Damn," Wayne said. "Bloody hell, China, that hurt," Harry said. Wayne turned to him with a grin. "Had to make it count." They flew down to where the teams were meeting around Madame Hooch. The Wolves had hoisted Ginny up and were cheering. "Settle down, I have something to say," Madame Hooch called out to them. That was one of the best games of Quidditch I've seen in my time. 20 points to each of your houses. The teams cheered. Now hit the showers, you all have to get to the feast on time. The teams for the first time noticed how late it was. The teams made their way to the locker rooms where they showered and changed back into their street clothes. As they were making their way out, they were stopped in their tracks by two people, unfamiliar to them and the other not so much. "Blimey, Victor Crumb," Ron squeaked out, causing laughter from the players and a small smirk from Victor and his classmate. "You flew well. Maybe they can play next time," Victor nodded to his classmate. "Bloody F. King hell yes," Wayne shouted. The players cracked up. "Good. See you at the feast." Victor and his friend left and made their way in the direction of the Durmstrang ship. "Adam and Eve, did that just happen?" Harry whispered. "Yeah," Angelina said. The group continued to trek up to the castle. They split off to their separate common rooms to change for the feast. They were supposed to wear their uniforms for the feast due to the selection. "Great match, guys," Isabel greeted them as they came into the Hufflepuff common room. "Yeah, you guys really put on a show," one of the fifth years said with a grin. Harry and Wayne made their way to their dorm room. Allie was sitting on Harry's bed and gave a loud meow. Harry went over to the cat. "Hey bud," Harry said while giving the cat a few scratches behind the ears. "What have you been up to?" Ollie walked out of the connecting bathroom tying his tie with a grin. He scared the piss out of Macmillan earlier. Wayne and Harry started laughing, especially as Allie seemed to preen. "How?" Harry asked. "He dive-bombed that obnoxious quill of his," Ollie said, laughing as the other two joined in. "How about some catnip for that?" Harry went to his trunk and got some out, giving it to Allie, who purred and flicked his tail. The two Quidditch players finished dressing in their uniforms and made their way to the common room with Ollie. They met up with Roger, Isabel, and Susan. "Man, this beeps," Roger said, adjusting his tie. "You think they're gonna let up with all the formal stuff soon?" "I doubt it. You know how much wizards like to show off," Susan said with a shake of her head. Isabel grinned and started laughing. Imagine the look on McGonagall's face if Harry wore that band shirt Sal sent him. Susan, Wayne, and Harry snickered. "What band?" Roger asked. "Black Sabbath," Harry said with a grin. Roger barked out a laugh while Ollie still looked confused. "I'll show you this summer," Roger told the pureblood. They came to the entrance to the great hall that was bursting with noise and students. The hall was decked out with even more traditional Samhain symbols than before. It included a large bonfire around the goblet of fire, and in place of candles the house tables had small bonfires spaced throughout, giving off light and heat. They took a seat near the doors to the great hall at Harry's behest. "Still avoiding the goblet?" Ollie asked with grin. "Bloody thing's gonna cock up the whole year," Harry muttered. "Harry," Susan snapped. Harry just shrugged and stabbed a piece of fried fish from a platter near him. He started eating while occasionally shooting glares at the goblet of fire, much to the amusement of the rest of his house. His friends at least tried to cover it as they started eating. The feast continued with speculation on who would be picked. Finally, candy and dessert of every kind appeared. Harry contented himself with treacle tart before moving on to grab 2 chocolate frogs. "Damn, they really are going all out," Wayne said as he grabbed his own chocolate frog. Half the candy appeared to be from Honeydukes, the expensive parts of Honeydukes. The rest was Muggle candy. Harry opened one of the chocolate frogs and grinned. Andros the Invincible, it was one he did not have. They heard a chair being pushed back and looked to the head table. Headmistress McGonagall stood. "I hope you have all enjoyed a Samhain feast." There was clapping from the Durmstrang and Beauxbaton students. "Now it is time for the selection of the champions." As she spoke, the goblet of fire appeared to glow brighter. "Please welcome our Master of Ceremonies, Ludo Bagman." She spoke with somewhat of an annoyed tone, but her face held a smile. The students, professors, and guests clapped as Bagman stood with a jolly smile on his face. Seated next to him was Dumbledore in robes of purple. Bagman himself was dressed in robes that featured yellow stripes. "How many headers ya think he took?" Wayne muttered to his friends. Ludo walked to the front of the head table and around the bonfire. "Thank you, Headmistress, for the gracious introduction." Surprised he knows what gracious means, Harry quipped to more laughter. They got a look from the Headmistress and quieted. I'm Ludo Bagman, former beater for the Windburn Wasps. Some fans gave a cheer while others rolled their eyes, and head of the department Magical Games and Sports. I welcome you to the 150th Triwizard Tournament. There were louder cheers this time. Bagman seemed to feed off them as his smile grew wider. By the end of the night, 3 of you will be able to call yourselves champions and have a chance to write your name in wizarding history. So without further ado, I give you the champion selection of the 1994 Triwizard Tournament. The many fires around the room dimmed to almost nothing, leaving the bonfire near the goblet as the main source of light. Harry looked around and had to admit Bagman knew how to get a crowd going. Suddenly the blue smoke of the goblet of fire flared red and enveloped the vessel. Out of the goblet a piece of parchment flew out. Bagman deftly grabbed it out the air. The Bobaton's champion is... He paused, Fleur Delacour. Harry was a bit shocked when it seemed the Hogwarts students were cheering louder than her classmates, one was even crying. Please come to the front. The Platinum Bee-owned girl strode gracefully up to the front and shook Bagman's hand. She stopped him from trying to key her hand with a quick move. She was directed to a side room off to the side of the Great Hall. Susan frowned. What do you think that was about? It's the French, who knows? Wayne shrugged. She's hot though. Ow, damn it all. Izzy looked satisfied. Harry snickered. He figured Wayne's shin just took a hit. Pig, Isabel muttered. Harry elbowed Wayne when it looked like he was going to open his mouth. Further discussion was halted as the goblet flared red again. The champion for Durmstrang is Victor Crumb. A loud cheer was heard from all the Quidditch fans while the Durmstrang were both clapping and stomping their feet. The Quidditch star got up from the table with grin and fist pump. He stood and Bagman shook his head before sending him on his way. He turned back with the largest grin yet, reminding Harry of the Joker. The goblet, the red flame burst out, another slip of paper, and all of Hogwarts leaned towards Bagman. The Hogwarts champion is Cedric Diggory. He shouted the name. The Hogwarts students, the Hufflepuffs in particular, shot up from their sets and roared with approval. Cedric stood up from the Hufflepuff table with a grin and determined look in his eyes. He nodded to his friends and Quidditch teammates all sitting near him. He strode up to the front of the hall and Bagman grabbed onto his head, shaking it. Cedric grinned at his head of house and the headmistress before making his way into the small room where the other 2 champions. Harry, after cheering for his friend, sighed and relaxed into his seat. Susan caught his eye and shot him a grin. The cheering died down and Bagman started to speak again. See China, ya. Worried for nothing. Wayne clapped him on the back. But just as he finished, a loud hissing was heard from the goblet and sparks turned the blue flames red bit by bit. The whole hall turned towards the display. Harry's stomach sank as a paper shot out. Bagman looked shocked and the paper floated to the ground. The hall watched as the paper lay on the ground. Then the whispers started, and Bagman shook himself before walking the few steps to the paper. He picked it up and as he straightened, he murmured a name before seeming to gather himself. Harry Potter, he shouted, sounding jubilant and with a large smile on his face. Harry froze as he heard his name come from Bagman. His whole body refused to move as he went rigid, his eyes focused on the wall past everyone, and he heard nothing but a buzz. More and more people started saying his name, but Harry did not hear until a hand was placed over his. Harry, Susan whispered next to him. It all snapped his focus back and he nearly flinched away but was able to stop himself. Harry, Bagman's coming. Harry Potter, come on up, my boy. He went to lay his hand on Harry, but Harry dodged and shot up. He walked up to the front of the hall with shouts of cheater ringing out. He did not look at anyone, merely walked forward and into the small antechamber. He continued walking towards the fireplace that was lit. Around the hearth the 3 champions gathered. Harry, Cedric questioned at the sight of him. Harry, for the first time since hearing Bagman shout his name, looked up. Cedric saw the confusion and panic in the younger Hufflepuff's eyes and moved towards him. He gripped Harry's shoulder in a brotherly way. Your name came out. The other 2 champions gasped. Harry nodded, keeping eye contact with Cedric. Cedric let out a breath and opened his mouth to speak again, only to look up as the door slammed open. Harry flinched and turned around to watch as 3 angry heads of school stalked in with Bagman, Dumbledore, his head of house, and his mother. The French one was speaking rapidly in her native tongue, but her point was clear in her gestures and look of contempt. The head of Durmstrang marched forward with scowl. "You little cheat." He went towards Harry with his hand raised, and Cedric quickly moved in front and drew his wand, holding it on the man. "You dare raise your wand at Met?" He went to pull his but stopped as Cedric spoke. "It's not mine you should be worried about, but the 3 very angry witches behind you." Karkaroff turned his head and gulped. The 6th year Hufflepuff added, "And if that doesn't scare you, Harry's about to knife you." His head whipped back around to notice the 4th year had slipped next to him. The Durmstrang headmaster jerked back and noticed the stiletto in the boy's hand, ready to strike. "Please everyone calm." Dumbledore's voice was loud and infused with power. Karkaroff backed off and Cedric and 3 women put their wands away, but Harry kept his knife in his hand. He did flip it closed though. "Karkaroff, if you approach my student again like that, I'll have you thrown back to Durmstrang on your ass." Headmistress McGonagall said, much to the surprise of everyone present given the swear at the end. Aurora for the first time relaxed, knowing her headmistress was supporting her, and she moved past everyone, stopping in front of Karkaroff. "She might just be sending pieces back if you dare to step towards my son again." Karkaroff paled at the implication. She moved to Harry's side and stood next to him with her hand on his shoulder. She squeezed it in support but did not say anything. She knew her son would not appreciate her fussing over him now. Dumbledore stepped forward. "Mr. Potter, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" Harry looked at him and shook his head while croaking out, "No." His voice was almost non-existent, drawing concern from the Hogwarts contingent present in the hall. "But of course, he is lying," the French headmistress bit out. Harry's face went blank, but his eyes showed his true feelings. The green eyes blazed as he stared at her with irritation bordering on hate. She stepped back before she could stop herself. "The hell he is," Professor Sinistra bit out, turning her glare from Karkaroff to the French woman. "Aurora," Headmistress McGonagall said with a warning. "Harry hasn't been near the goblet," Cedric spoke up from where he was standing. Karkaroff snorted in disbelief. "Enough," Headmistress McGonagall called in a strict, commanding tone that had everyone turning to her. She turned to Harry and offered him a small grin of reassurance. "Mr. Potter is not lying, as we're all aware of. The age line was drawn properly and invoked by Dumbledore. None of the students can pass over it without our knowledge." Karkaroff did not seem to want to let it go, so he had an older year throw it in. 5 glares were fixed on him as they heard a clunking sound come up behind where Bagman, Dumbledore, and Professor Sprout stood facing the group of students and heads. Professor Moody came into view. "Headmistress, the students have been sent to their houses, including Beauxbatons and Durmstrang." He fixed both his eyes on the foreign man. Harry was amused when Karkaroff practically skulked into the shadows behind his student. Moody smirked at the man. "I examined the goblet as asked. It appears a powerful Confundus charm was placed on it. Simple enough not to alert us, but it would take a great deal of power to place that charm upon an artifact like the goblet. Far beyond the talents of any student, even our adult ones." He nodded his head in the directions of the champions. This seemed to placate the French headmistress. Harry could not tell about Karkaroff as the man was still hiding behind his champion. "Z's little boy is going to compete," the French champion said incredulously. Harry spun with anger at hearing her words and glared at the French girl. His eyes burned brighter and his fist clenched around his knife, which was still out. The French girl seemed surprised and then took her own step back into the shadow of her headmistress as Professor Sinistra added her own glare. The room grew silent as the two stared down the French girl. Cedric stood off to the side, trying desperately not to laugh out loud. Professor Sprout slipped over to him and gave him a look. Cedric just looked down at the ground. "No," Harry whispered the word into the silence. "Qua, the bee," Owen said quietly. Harry had already spun back around to glare at the adults. "I'm not competing. I don't give a fly, F.K. if my name came out. I didn't put it in and I'm not F.Kin doing it." Harry's voice cracked and nearly disappeared at some points of his short speech. Most of the room looked surprised, having only ever heard Harry talk after using his potion. Dumbledore, however, looked like he had aged 10 more years. Professor Sinistra closed her eyes and sighed, Harry. He turned to face her at the tone of her voice. She was not angry with him, she sounded sad. She opened her eyes and Harry saw concern and slight terror. His brow furrowed and he cocked his head to the side. I'm fine, she said low enough that only he heard. You have to compete. Her voice was strained. Your name coming out is a magically binding contract. If you don't compete you could lose your magic, she said quietly. Suddenly all the glass in the room shattered with a loud crack and surge of magic was felt. A few yells and some shrieks of fright were heard as people went for cover of their wands. The surge of magic stopped as sudden as it started, Harry. Aurora's tone was forceful yet loving. She had moved to cup his face with her hands forcing them close and Harry to look her in the eyes. Cedric watched as his young friend's form relaxed and the magic died down. The occupants were staring at the pair with fascination as Aurora looked up and eyed Bagman and Dumbledore. I assume there was a point to this meeting, get on with it. Cedric had to fight back from shrinking away, he recognized that tone from class. It was the same tone of voice she had when she was about to make some poor sod regret their choice to continue astronomy class just to hit on her. Right, Bagman said, clearing his throat. He seemed to gain some of his energy back when they all turned to him. Welcome to the annals of the Triwizard Tournament champions. Magic was rising in the room again but Aurora refocused Harry on her and it died down. One of a wizard's or witch's best characteristics is courage in the face of the unknown. So, for your first task on November 24th, you will not be told what you will face. Professor Sinistra fought a growl at the lack of information. She looked up, is that all? Well yes, Bagman said, sounding like a 4-year-old who just had their balloon popped. Good, come on Harry. Professor Sinistra finally let go of Harry's face. She nodded her head towards the door. Harry brushed past everyone else with his mother at his side. Cedric made to go after them but was held back by Professor Sprout. Let them go Cedric, Professor Sprout said, looking after the two. Go to the common room. Let them know what happened and then, she gave him a large grin, enjoy your party. Cedric grinned at his head of house though she could still see worry in his eyes which only made her prouder of the boy. The two foreign heads and their students left speaking in their native tongues. Cedric heard his own headmistress ask Dumbledore and Bagman to join her in her office as he left. Harry and his mother moved silently through the halls ignoring the portraits shouting inquiries at them. No students were out except a few prefects who ducked around the corner seeing their astronomy professor with a look that promised pain on her face. They made their way up to her office and through to her quarters in record time. Harry, she pulled him to look at her. Harry just shook his head and grabbed her in a hug. It's going to be okay. I don't want this, Harry said, and Aurora had to strain to hear his voice. I know, she rubbed his back. They stood silent for a bit. Why don't you go stay here tonight? Professor Sprout won't mind. Harry pulled back and nodded. Harry, you may not want this, but you can do this, she said, staring into his eyes. Harry searched her face for any deceit and found none. Harry took a deep breath and nodded firmly. Good, now I need to call Daddy, she said, rubbing her temples, trying to ease some tension. Harry turned and walked to the extra bedroom in the professor's quarters. He smiled as he saw Allie sitting in the middle of bed. Allie meowed at him, stretched, and then jumped straight at him. Harry caught the cat deftly and started scratching behind his ears, making the cat purr. Harry didn't have the energy to do much beside fall on the bed and Allie curled up next to his head, purring away. Outside Harry's room, Aurora paced for a few minutes trying to gather her thoughts. She moved to her flow and activated a rune that allowed her to open it to travel. Aurora took a handful of green powder and stepped into the flow, Sinistra manner. She disappeared in a flash of green before getting spit out into the entrance hall. Mistress Aurora, Toddy the house elf asked, surprised. Where is my father? He be in his study. The little elf popped back out. Aurora made her way to her father's study slowly as she tried to keep herself together. She knocked as she opened the door. Aurora, he called happily as he looked up. His smile slipped from his face as he met her eyes. He saw the defeated, worried look in her eyes. He shot up from his desk. Aurora, what's wrong? Harry. He wrapped his arms around her in a hug. From behind he saw his wife hurry towards them. She added her own arms around her daughter. Aurora sagged in her parents' arms and started to cry quietly. "Honey, what's wrong?" her mother questioned. Aurora pulled back and wiped her eyes. In a much calmer tone than even she expected replied, "Harry's name came out of the goblet of fire." "Son of a bitch." Dawn swore with vigor. "I'm going to string that old bastard up by his beard." Aurora smiled at her mother's reaction. It turned to giggles as she tried not to burst out in laughter. Her mother would not be pleased. Her father was staring at her mother with a look of pride and awe that never ceased to make Aurora laugh. She was fairly certain any other, respectable pureblood, wizard would be appalled at the language. As fun as that would be to watch, I don't think Dumbledore had anything to do with this. Aurora sunk into one of the chairs in her father's office. Her mother came with and laid a comforting hand on her shoulders. Cyril took out a bottle of whiskey and poured 3 tumblers for them. "What happened?" Cyril asked, handing the glasses over. He pulled up another chair close to Aurora's so he could lay a hand of support on her knee. Dawn came and sat on his chair's arm. Dumbledore himself, under the watch of the 3 heads of the schools and other government officials, drew the age line around the goblet. No one, except maybe a pissed-off Harry, could break it. Aurora said with a wry grin. Dawn and Cyril snorted. Minerva asked Moody to investigate, and so far, he was able to ascertain a Confundus charm was placed on the goblet. Cyril's face turned stony. "A Confundus charm? That's it. You're the one that always says wizards forget the obvious," Dawn added. "A very powerful one," Aurora said. "Has anyone checked out Karkaroff out?" Cyril asked and then looked worried when Aurora nearly growled. "That bastard not that good of an actor. He almost attacked Harry, but Cedric stepped in front and pulled his wand on him. Minerva, Pomona, and I did as well. And Harry almost knifed him," she ended with some amusement. Cyril did growl. "That slimy shite is going back to Azkaban." "Back?" Dawn questioned, her eyes lit with annoyance. "He's a Death Eater who got let out early due to turning evidence against others," Cyril told his wife. "How is he the head of a school?" Dawn asked incredulously. "It's Durmstrang. They're famous for teaching the dark arts as a subject still. He mostly took that position and then blackmailed somebody for headmaster." Cyril answered. "I'll go to the ministry first thing and file a complaint against him personally. The Wizenmaggot will go for that. It's not against the school directly, so the Bulgarians won't have an issue." He took a sip of his drink before smirking. It might just be the most voted for resolution since the war ended. Plenty of his old friends on the pureblood block will want revenge, and the light and neutral families will love to see him thrown out of the country in Durmstrang. "Meet with Amelia while you're there," Aurora said, twirling her glass. "I've no doubt Minerva will keep Dumbledore from bury his head in the sand, but we need to remind the whole Wizenmaggot what family Harry is a part of." Cyril finished with a nod. "Hopefully that will head off some of the taunting Harry's going to get from the other houses. I assume Cedric won the Hogwarts spot since you mentioned him." "Yes," Aurora gave a genuine smile. Harry was rather happy for his friend. "The other houses are going to be pissed Hufflepuff gets 2 champions now," Dawn said, knowing enough of the rivalry just from Quidditch. "Yes, but those with light or neutral parents will be hearing from them after I make it clear this is seen as an attack on our house. I'll stop by Sirius's before to explain and bring him along as Lord Black." Aurora nodded her thanks. "Why don't you head back to school, honey, back to Harry?" Dawn said, pulling her daughter up and into a hug. "Thanks, Mum, Daddy." She gave them both a hug, before making her way to the flow with them by her side. She gave them one more hug before flowing back to Hogwarts. Aurora was spit out of her personal quarters flow. She sighed, running her hand over her face. She made her way to the extra room that was added for Harry in his first year. She flicked her wand and the candles in the room lit to a low level. Harry was asleep with Allie near his head. The cat's eyes opened to look at Aurora. As Allie looked at her, Harry murmured something in his sleep and his brow furrowed. Allie rolled closer to him and started purring. Aurora also came over and placed her hand on his brow. Harry seemed to settle back down, which made Aurora smile in relief. She was honestly surprised he did not shoot up with his knife. She gave Allie a pat before leaving to go to her own chambers. Cedric made his way out of the antechamber shaking his head. He started down the stairs to get to the Hufflepuff common room and was unsurprised to see the 4 fourth years waiting for him. He gave a slight smile to them knowing they waited outside the common room so Neville could hear. "Harry is with Professor Sinistra." Cedric cut off their question before asked, "And he has to compete," Cedric finished with a grimace. Izzy threw her hands up in disgust at his words. King why? She snapped out. Susan reprimanded her nodding to the portraits who looked upset at the swear. Izzy just flicked the portraits off. Susan giggled a bit before turning to Cedric. "Why does he have to compete? He didn't put his name in." The others looked to the 6th year. Cedric ran a hand through his hair before answering, "Apparently it's a magically binding contract when your name is chosen by the goblet. So, if he doesn't compete, he could lose his magic." Neville asked with an annoyed tone. Wayne looked at him with some confusion. The Longbottoms still have a few magically binding contracts with vassal houses. Bugger. They weren't playing, were they? Wayne shook his head. Harry tried to say he would not compete, but then Professor Sinistra told him about the contract. How angry did Harry get? Susan asked with concern, especially since Harry did not come back with Cedric. Cedric gave small grin. Every piece of glass in the antechamber shattered. "I'm pretty sure the French girl is regretting calling him a little boy." Neville and Wayne started laughing loudly. Iz had stopped pacing at his words, her anger bleeding away as a smirk formed on her face. Susan just looked annoyed. "Oh, and he almost stabbed the Durmstrang head while the rest of us almost cursed him." Neville and Wayne started howling with laughter at the thought, and Izzy followed quickly behind. Susan, ever the more responsible one, smiled but also pinched the bridge of her nose. She was getting a headache. "Why?" Cedric shrugged, and with an annoyed tone, he came at Harry with his hands raised. "Well, he's dead," Izzy said with another laugh, and this time Susan joined her. "All right, we should boy wonder to his party," Wayne snarked, and Cedric punched him in the shoulder. "Congratulations, Cedric," Neville said with a grin before turning to the other Hufflepuffs. "See you guys tomorrow." The younger Hufflepuffs swarmed Cedric with congratulations now that they knew what had happened with their friend. Wayne stopped them from going through the door to the common room by holding his hand up. Wayne tapped his wand and the Hufflepuff common room door swung open. Wayne could see the house waiting, impatiently. He grinned and cleared his throat. He waved his wand and trumpets were heard. "Now presenting the Hogwarts Triwizard Champion, Cedric Diggory," he yelled out in an overly pompous voice and took a bow, letting Cedric in. The common room cheered as Cedric came in. Wayne, Izzy, and Susan disappeared off into one nooks in the common room. They sat quietly but cheered whenever someone shouted Cedric's name. Oliver and Roger came over to them. "Harry?" Oliver asked as the two sat next to Wayne. "He's with his mum, who's probably rallying Lord Sinistra," Susan answered. "Any idea who it was?" Roger asked, looking around the room. Aside from a select few of Hufflepuff, the whole house believed Harry had nothing to do with it. "We all know it wasn't him, except for a couple of poofters." He nodded to Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley. Izzy just rolled her eyes towards the other two fourth-year Hufflepuff boys. "Idiots," Izzy mumbled. Cedric didn't say if they had any information, but we saw Moody around the cup after they dismissed all of us. The group sat quietly for a few minutes before Roger spoke. "Harry's got shite luck." The others burst out laughing. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.